After the outer body incarnations had gained their own souls, they could only hide within Han Shua's body. He did not dare to risk these two outer body incarnations that he had painstakingly formed without any assurance of success. Therefore, after a brief moment of hesitation, Han Shua decided to try activating the interplanar transportation matrix in the dilapidated cemetery of death. It was at this moment that several dozen shadows landed behind Han Shui one after another with whooshing noises. These were the demons that Han Shua had just subdued. They were too slow and were left behind. Now, all of them had finally arrived. "Stand here and don't move," Han Shua softly shouted. As soon as those words left his mouth, a fleeting shadow slowly floated out from Han Shua's chest. It warped in midair and transformed into another Han Shua. Step by step, the shadow walked towards the cemetery of death. The outer perimeter of the dilapidated cemetery of death was also protected by an invisible boundary. However, it was unknown whether it was because of the passage of time or because it had been damaged before, but compared to the invisible boundary that existed on Profound Continent, this one was much weaker. When Han Shua's avatar of death approached the invisible boundary, before Han Shua could make a move, an extremely familiar feeling suddenly welled up in his heart. Before Han Shua could think further, the deep black magical robe draped over his body suddenly lit up with a soft green radiance. The boundary that enveloped the dilapidated interplanar transportation matrix very amicably split open to form an opening that allowed Han Shua to pass through. After being startled, Han Shua abruptly came to his senses. He exclaimed in delight, "So it's his. Haha, this is so much more convenient." From the flickering green radiance of the deep black magical robe, Han Shua, who was used to activating the cemetery of death on Profound Continent with the skeletal staff, immediately understood that the owner of the deep black magical robe, the mid-god whose soul he had completely melted, was the owner of the cemetery of death in the Abyss realm. What's going on? Bichimo's pupils suddenly shrank when he saw that Han Shua had effortlessly entered instead of forcibly breaking through the boundary like he did back then. "I've already said that I know a thing or two about this place. Don't worry, I'll take care of it." The avatar of death continued to move forward. However, the main body standing beside Bichimo's suddenly opened its mouth and spoke. "You're a lich too?" Bichimo's stared blankly for a moment, before as though he suddenly recalled something. He stared at Han Shua and asked. Han Shua was startled. He turned his head to look at Bichimo's and asked, "How do you know what a lich is?" From all the memories left behind by the owner of the skeletal staff, Han Shua knew that those who cultivated in the elemental energy of death were also called liches. Those who cultivated in the elemental energy of death to become overgods were also known as lich kings. Since Bichimos knew what a lich was, it meant that he naturally came from a material plane where the concept of gods was extremely clear. "Of course I know. Back then, when I was sent here by my family, I came here together with those liches. This interplanar transportation array was made by that mid-god lich. We all came here through that transportation array," Bichimos explained naturally. Han Shua couldn't contain his curiosity after hearing those words. He looked at Bichimos with great interest and asked, "Can you briefly tell me what happened back then?" "Actually, there's not much to say." Bichimos faintly sighed. After thinking for a while, he slowly said, "Since you are also a lich, you should have also come from a higher material plane. Naturally, you would understand some of the aspirations of the overgod of death and the gods of destruction. In order to obtain more power, the overgod of death and the gods of destruction dispatched their subordinates to spread death and destruction across all material planes. I was one of them. In order to temper me, my family sent me out. Those liches were one of our allies. Our goal was to completely control the Abyss realm. However, when we arrived here, we discovered that there were already powerful beings in the Abyss realm. We could be considered as invaders. In this peculiar valley, we had a great battle with them. Although we were slightly stronger, during the battle, no one could have predicted that there would be such a strange thing as the stellar sand current. In the end, both parties were not aware of the danger and were all enveloped by the stellar sand current. Apart from me, not a single god of the Abyss realm was able to escape. You're really lucky. Han Shuo said as he sized up Bichimo's with an odd look. Bichimo's green eyes flashed with a trace of sorrow. He shook his head and sighed. It's not luck. It's just that my identity was a little special, and my strength was lacking. Back then, I came here purely because my family had mobilized their power to allow me to gain some merits in that expedition. Therefore, I had been observing the development of the situation from afar and did not directly participate in that great battle. As I was an outsider, I could clearly see the changes in Tanai. In the beginning, I didn't understand why the stellar sand current was so frightening. It was only when I discovered that those people were dying one after another that I realized what had happened. Unfortunately, at that time, apart from me who had been observing from afar, everyone else was enveloped by the stellar sand current. My warning came a little too late. I had no choice but to do my best to escape from the abyss. So that's how it is. Han Shuo nodded. His expression when he looked at Bichimo's became even weirder. From his words, Han Shuo understood that Bichimo's original identity must have been rather noble. His family clan's strength was certainly not to be underestimated. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to stay out of this expedition without fighting, yet still be able to effortlessly fish for merits. After I escaped from this place, I stayed outside and silently observed this place. Gradually, I figured out the operating principle of that stellar sand current. I also tried to re-enter this place a few times. I discovered that for some unknown reason, this battlefield had formed all kinds of boundaries. Even the interplanar transportation matrix deployed by the most powerful Lich had been sealed off. I don't know anything about interplanar transportation matrices, so I couldn't use this broken interplanar transportation matrix to leave the abyss. For so many years, I tried to find every method that could allow me to leave this place, but to no avail. The reason why I told the other four about the existence of the void was because I hoped to borrow their strength to see if I could make more discoveries in this place. However, those four didn't seem to care much about this aspect. All they wanted was to obtain the divine weapons in this place and raise their strength at all costs. After so many years, I have been thoroughly disappointed in them. This time, even if you don't kill them, after leaving this place, I will kill them one by one, Manticore said in a ruthless voice. Why? Han Shuo was stunned. Since I couldn't use interplanar transportation matrices to leave the abyss, I had no choice but to fly out of the abyss and carry out interplanar travel in search of another material plane with high-level creatures and interplanar transportation matrices. However, interplanar travel is too dangerous. Only those who possess high god strength can carry it out, and I am merely a low god. The process of advancing from low god to high god is too long, so long that I am not willing to think about it. But after wasting 1,000 years, I have no other choice but to do this. In the past, I didn't care much about the energy of faith because I hoped that those 4 demon kings could help me. But since they couldn't help me, I naturally had to take everything that belonged to me so that I could improve faster, Bichim explained indifferently. From his words, it seemed that the 4 demon kings were merely puppets that he supported. Their fates were in his hands. I believe that you won't have to wait that long. It was at this moment that Han Shuo suddenly said confidently. As soon as those words left his mouth, the interplanar coordinates of the broken ancient interplanar transportation matrix in the Cemetery of Death suddenly lit up. Chapter 579. At this moment, Bichimos, who had waited bitterly for an unknown number of years, had an astonishing divine radiance in his green eyes. His body trembled uncontrollably. His mouth was agape, but for a moment, he was so excited that he couldn't speak. He could only pant heavily. In the memories left behind by the original owner of the skeletal staff was the method to activate and use an interplanar transportation matrix. The interplanar transportation matrix here was of the same origin as the one in the Cemetery of Death. There was no difference at all. Moreover, the mid-god divine soul Han Shuo had digested was none other than the owner of this interplanar transportation matrix. Not to mention that Han Shuo was a low god of death. Han Shuo had all the necessary tools. Therefore, Han Shuo, who was well-versed in the art of interplanar transportation matrix, could easily activate it. It's activated. It's really activated. Bichimos mumbled to himself after a long while. as though he had just woken up from his immense excitement. He gazed at the interplanar transportation matrix that was constantly flickering with radiance. Han Shua's heart was also filled with ecstasy. From the transformation of this dilapidated interplanar transportation matrix, Han Shua clearly knew that there was hope for his return journey. Profound Continent had everything he was familiar with, as well as enemies that were engraved in his bones. Naturally, Han Shua would never forget that place. And now, with this interplanar transportation matrix of the void, Han Shua had essentially opened up a pathway between Profound Continent and Dark Continent. Not only could he return to Profound Continent, but he could also return to the Abyss Realm through the Cemetery of Death in the Dark Forest. What a wonderful thing this was! Bichimos, who was beyond excited, looked at the flickering interplanar transportation matrix and couldn't contain his joy as he said, "I have enough energy ores. As long as I inject the energy ores and make some arrangements, the interplanar transportation matrix can be activated. We should hurry up." Han Shua nodded and smilingly said, "It seems that we can finally get what we wanted. Thank you very much. I will remember this favor." Bichimos was in an extremely good mood. His voice carried a trace of elegance. "You're welcome." Han Shua had a strange feeling as he listened to Bichimos' elegant voice. He did not know whether this Bichimos was a man or a woman. Having stayed in the Abyss Realm for such a long time, Han Shua had seen all kinds of bizarre characters. Even Han Shua was somewhat unable to make out Bichimos' true appearance. "My lord, it's bad. Look up." Bord suddenly shouted at this moment. Startled, Han Shua and Bichimos raised their heads, only to discover that a bright light had abruptly emerged from the misty sky above their heads. Both of them cried out in unison, "Is the Stardust Current about to return?" Han Shua hastily asked. Bichimos' eyes were filled with incomparable panic. He anxiously said, "Yes, the return of the Stardust Current is extremely fast. I've waited for too long. I really don't want to wait any longer. What should I do?" "How long will it take for the Stardust Current to return?" Han Shua's consciousness calmed down and immediately asked. "Very soon. Faster than you can imagine. It will definitely arrive before you fill up the energy ores." Bichimos' voice was extremely urgent. "Then what are we waiting for? Leave this place at once." Han Shua softly shouted. He instructed Bord, Zinnia, and the others, "Don't worry about anything. Leave this place at once." Even though he said so, he himself did not move. I can't accept this," Bichimos said in an agitated and furious tone. The avatars of death and destruction abruptly retreated to Bichimos' side, while Han Shua's main body seized the opportunity to enter the interplanar transportation matrix. His avatars of death and destruction simultaneously reached out to support Bichimos and dragged him outside. As they flew, Han Shua said, "We can't stay here for long. In any case, you've already waited for so long. One more time won't matter." When Han Shua grasped Bichimos' wrist that was wrapped in green armor, he felt soft and warm, as though the green armor did not exist at all. This gave Han Shua a strange feeling. Bichimos was agitated. With a jolt of his strength, he shook off Han Shua's hand and asked anxiously, "Is it possible to set up and activate the interplanar transportation matrix before the Stardust Current returns?" "You said it's impossible. Let's go. We can't stay here any longer," Han Shua quickly replied. Seeing that the majority of the demons had begun to retreat outside, Han Shua shouted at Bord and Zinnia, "What are you still doing here? Hurry up and return the way we came. Do you really want to die here? Your lordship hasn't moved yet. Your subordinates dare not leave first." Bord and Zinnia exchanged glances and replied in unison, "Under my command, there aren't so many rules. Protecting your own life is the most important thing," Han Shua berated. Soon after, he shouted, "Go." Upon hearing Han Shua's words and seeing Han Shua's resolute expression, Bord and Zinnia no longer insisted. They bowed towards Han Shua and flew away behind the demons. "Follow me. We will leave the void for the time being, but we will return very soon. I promise you." Han Shua's two avatars once again dragged Bichimos. Without saying a word, they pulled him and flew towards the outside. Bichimos finally regained his clarity of mind. He understood that staying in the void would only lead to death. It was precisely because of this that he only took Han Shua's assurance as comforting words and did not take it to heart. However, when Han Shua's two avatars dragged him outside, while the other Han Shua remained calmly at the interplanar transportation matrix, Bichimos was somewhat bewildered. He pointed at Han Shua's body that was getting further and further away from them and exclaimed in shock, That you? Why aren't you leaving? Don't worry. Although that other me isn't strong enough, this stardust current can kill so many gods, but it's useless against me alone. Han Shua said proudly. Impossible. Bichimos shrieked. He glared at Han Shua and shouted, No god can escape the corrosion of the stardust current. No one. If that body of yours stays behind, only death awaits you. I know what I'm doing. You don't need to worry. Han Shua did not explain further. Seeing that Bichimos had begun to fly away, Han Shua no longer supported him. Gradually, the stardust current seemed to appear in the distance. Han Shua's two avatars, Bichimos, and Han Shua's newly accepted believers all hurriedly returned the way they came. In the center of the misty valley in the void, only Han Shua's avatars remained at the interplanar transportation matrix. Han Shua, who cultivated in demonic arts, had his consciousness infinitely useful and was completely unaffected by the stardust current. After everyone disappeared, Han Shua calmly and unhurriedly took out a large amount of magic crystal ores from his space ring. The energy ores Bichimos mentioned were, of course, magic crystal ores that could provide the energy required for the interplanar transportation matrix. The magic crystal ores he took out were of the highest quality and contained a considerable amount of energy. The surroundings of the interplanar transportation matrix were covered with grooves of various sizes, specially used to store magic crystal ores. With his consciousness unafraid of the corrosion of the stardust current, Han Shua was not in a hurry. He carefully and meticulously placed these magic crystal ores of the highest quality into those grooves. Then, relying on the memory of his consciousness, he began to slowly modify this interplanar transportation matrix. Just as Bichimos had said, the speed at which the stardust current returned was extremely fast. Not long after Bichimos and the others had left, the swift and violent stardust current had already filled up this void valley. The soul-corroding energy naturally began to stir in Han Shua's consciousness. However, Han Shua utilized the wondrous abilities of his consciousness to continuously split and reassemble the energy. He was completely unscathed. After a while, with Han Shua's full concentration, a magical imprint on the interplanar transportation matrix suddenly glowed brilliantly. Han Shua was overjoyed. He knew that the magical imprint was specially used to input the coordinates of an interplanar plane. Its glowing signified that the energy in the grooves of the interplanar transportation matrix was sufficient to carry out interplanar teleportation. In other words, this interplanar transportation matrix could now be used for real. Every interplanar transportation matrix had its own coordinates. To carry out interplanar teleportation, one would need the coordinates of another destination. This was common knowledge that Han Shua had long understood. Back when Han Shua was still on Profound Continent, when he learned from the Calamity Church that the enormous transportation matrix in the Cemetery of Death could carry out interplanar teleportation, he had spent a great deal of time and effort researching that enormous transportation matrix. Naturally, he knew the coordinates of the interplanar transportation matrix in the Cemetery of Death on Profound Continent. Now that the magical imprint on the interplanar transportation matrix had glowed, Han Shua was overjoyed. He prepared to use the method from his memory to input the coordinates of the interplanar transportation matrix in the Cemetery of Death on Profound Continent with his mental strength. When the overjoyed Han Shua thought that he would soon be able to return to Profound Continent through the interplanar transportation matrix, he couldn't contain his excitement. Even the fingers of his hands that were still holding a few pieces of magic crystal ores subconsciously bent and trembled in excitement. However, it was at this moment that the entire valley suddenly underwent an unusual change. For some unknown reason, the energy of the countless boundaries, seals, and broken magical matrices that were scattered all over the valley that was once the battlefield of the gods suddenly turned chaotic. They transformed into rays of light that shot towards the only living being in the valley, Han Shua. Chapter 580. Han Shua was shocked. Due to the unique environment of this valley where the gods had once fought, some of those who died in the stardust had completely lost their willpower. Their divine souls had retained their pure memories in the valley. There were also some who had a portion of their divine energy strangely condensed into divine essences of various elements. However, the majority of their divine energy was attached to those boundaries and seals. Under the corrosion of the stardust, the divine energy had slowly changed its flavor. The boundaries, seals, and magical matrices that they had created with all their might before their deaths were only to prevent the stardust quicksand from corroding their soul energy. Unfortunately, they were of no use. These cobweb-like boundaries that covered the valley had remained after their deaths. The remnants of their divine energy were still present, but under the corrosion of the stardust quicksand, they had undergone some mysterious changes. At this moment, perhaps due to the return of the stardust current, or due to Han Shua's activation of the interplanar transportation matrix, the remnant energy within the boundaries and magical matrices that covered the entire valley suddenly transformed into rays of light that surged ferociously towards Han Shua. Han Shua, who had turned pale with fright, understood just how terrifying this energy was. He no longer paid any attention to the interplanar transportation matrix beside him and immediately sat cross-legged on the ground. He deployed a protective shield in an instant and completely enveloped his body. Han Shua's consciousness could withstand the corrosion from the stardust current, but his body might not be able to withstand the terrifying attacks of these energies, especially since these energies obviously came from different systems, and there were some changes that Han Shua did not know about. He had no choice but to defend with all his might. Holding his breath and concentrating, Han Shua adjusted his breathing, heartbeat, and even the rhythm of his blood circulation. The demonic yuan in his body was operated to the extreme, forming rays of black light that flowed on the protective shield. Papa, rays of light that resembled meteors fiercely collided with Han Shua's protective shield. These energies that had been split into many parts were still extremely terrifying after so many years. One or two was still manageable, but when dozens of them came together, the ferocious impact made Han Shua want to vomit blood. Not good. Han Shua was greatly alarmed. From the violent impact of the protective shield, and through his consciousness sensing the thousands of energies around him, Han Shua knew that he was in great trouble this time. Amidst the crackling sounds, the protective shield that Han Shua had painstakingly deployed seemed to be on the verge of shattering at any moment. The demonic yuan in his body was also greatly depleted. Judging from this situation, Han Shua knew that he would not be able to hold on for much longer. The strange energies in the surroundings transformed into rays of light that shot onto Han Shua's protective shield, blossoming with brilliant light. Indifferently, Han Shua silently sat in front of the interplanar transportation matrix, exerting all the energy in his body that he could use to constantly inject it into his protective shield, forcibly resisting the attacks of the rays of light. Han Shua could feel the magical yuan within his body gradually drying up. The source of his power, the demonic infant, also seemed to have no more strength to sustain itself under the enormous consumption. For a moment, Han Shua was rather at a loss. He thought to himself, "This is bad. Is this main body that I rely on for survival going to be destroyed under such circumstances? I can't accept this." Even now, Han Shua did not lose his composure. At least, there was one thing that Han Shua could be sure of. Even if his body was destroyed, his divine sense would not be obliterated. With this premise in mind, Han Shua began to think about the possibility of preserving his body at this critical moment, trying to find a way to survive in the most dangerous situation. One demonic technique after another flashed through Han Shua's mind. Many demonic techniques and demonic nature insights were repeatedly weighed by Han Shua. Abruptly, Han Shua's eyes, which had been tightly shut all this time, opened abruptly. A strange luster shone in the depths of his pupils. Poverty leads to change, and change leads to enlightenment. Some vague insights into the Nine Changes realm caused Han Shua to suddenly come up with a bold idea. Based on his trust and understanding of demonic arts, Han Shuo suddenly made a bold decision. In an instant, the demonic yuan that had been continuously pouring into his protective shield to defend against the strange rays of light was forcibly severed by Han Shuo. In the next moment, the protective shield that had been holding up all this time shattered into specks of light that filled the sky and dissipated like glass. The tens of thousands of rays of light that danced wildly in the sky but ultimately shot towards Han Shuo lost the protection of his protective shield and directly bombarded Han Shuo's body where he was sitting cross-legged. As expected, Han Shuo's skin and flesh were lacerated. The numerous rays of light bombarded Han Shuo's body and immediately inflicted heavy damage on him. His limbs, bones, internal organs, and every corner of his body were instantly drenched in blood. Some of the weaker parts were even penetrated and large chunks of flesh fell off. The remaining demonic yuan was used by Han Shuo to firmly defend the demonic infant, which was the source of his power. As for the other parts of his body, Han Shuo no longer paid attention to them. Amidst the spurting blood, the piercing pain was also unforgettable. The agony of being hacked into pieces was all over his body at this moment. Han Shuo clenched his teeth and held on. He used his demonic yuan to firmly defend the demonic infant. Feeling the wounds on his body, he did not let out a cry of pain. Amidst the spurting blood, the rays of light completely fell on Han Shuo's battered body. The hundreds and thousands of rays of energy did not travel in the same direction. They also collided with each other inside Han Shuo's body. Strange noises continuously sounded from within Han Shuo's body. Han Shuo's entire body began to tremble violently. The pain that was 10 times more intense began to erupt as the various energies battled within his body. Han Shuo, who had been bitterly holding on, could no longer endure it. In this most mystical valley of the Abyss realm, in the center of the divine battlefield enshrouded by the stardust quicksand, Han Shuo suddenly stood up. His entire body was drenched in blood. His body was riddled with holes and chunks of flesh were falling off his body. He raised his head to the sky and howled madly. At this moment, Han Shuo did not look like a human at all. He was like a bloodthirsty demon, a demented demon. Along with the spurting of blood, Han Shuo's extremely tough tendons and meridians also ruptured one by one. Since the beginning of his life, Han Shuo's physical body had suffered serious injuries several times. But never once had it been as thorough as it was now. It could be said that other than the demonic infant that Han Shuo was protecting with all his might, every single cell in Han Shuo's body was being destroyed by the hundreds and thousands of rays of energy that were fighting against each other. Han Shuo's ferocious and terrifying howls came out of his mouth, but no one could hear them. Gradually, it was as though all the mutated energies left behind by the boundaries and seals of the entire valley had transformed into rays of light that shot towards Han Shuo's body. Han Shuo's crazed howls grew weaker and weaker as his demonic yuan diminished. After an unknown period of time, the stardust quicksand that had enveloped the entire valley finally disappeared amidst the high-speed flow. For some reason, the white mist that had lingered in the valley all year long no longer existed. Not a single one of the boundaries and seals that had densely covered the valley like a spider's web was left behind. The broken magical matrices were still there, but they had forever lost the support of energy. The valley now seemed to have lost its miraculous power after the return of the stardust quicksand current, and there was no longer any danger. In the center of the valley, in front of the interplanar transportation matrix, a body that did not seem to be human was still gently wriggling amidst the dripping blood and flesh. After an unknown period of time, that gently wriggling body slowly came to a stop. It was as if this person who had been struggling with all his might had truly lost all signs of life. However, the blood that had covered the ground was strangely flowing back for some unknown reason. As if it was being drawn by an invisible force, bit by bit, drop by drop, it was being sucked by that body that did not seem to be human. Large chunks of flesh were on top of the blood. It was extremely strange. The blood seemed to have become a moving bloody cloth, dragging the pieces of flesh and broken tendons towards the horrifying body in the center. Then, it slowly adhered to that body again. In the body, inside the countless bloody holes, rays of light slowly split and quickly recombined, gradually twisting into a new force that swam in the body in a mysterious trajectory and finally gathered in the lower abdomen. The strange changes continued, and the bloody holes were quickly healing at a speed that was difficult to see with the naked eye. Blood, flesh, tendons, cells, everything that had been lost was growing again in the body. That recombined new force was injected into the blood, flesh, tendons, and cells bit by bit. It made the most basic units that made up the body become unprecedentedly strong and tough. This process was very slow, and it lasted for a very long time. Perhaps it was a day, or perhaps it was a year. However, it was finally completed. The person was still the same person, and there was no change in his appearance or body. However, there was no longer a trace of blood or a piece of flesh beside him, as if the tragic scene that had just happened in Tanai's body was just an illusion that had appeared out of thin air. With the spread of his divine sense, everything in the entire valley was reflected in Han Shua's mind without any obstruction. His eyes were calm, but his heart was filled with great joy. Destruction and construction. It was only now that he truly understood the beauty of this sentence. 9 changes, 9 changes. It really requires a crazy mutation to produce a qualitative change. Han Shua lowered his head to look at the interplanar transportation matrix behind him, then looked up at the sky. He hesitated for a moment and first circled the valley at high speed. His space ring flashed, as if he was collecting something. After a while, he suddenly turned into a strange light, and with a speed that was difficult for the naked eye to catch, he flew out of the abyss. Chapter 581. Outside the void, Bichimo's green eyes were filled with complicated emotions as he gazed at the stardust current that blocked the entrance. Not far from him, Han Shua's 2 avatars appeared unperturbed, as though they weren't worried in the slightest. Sigh. A sigh sounded from Bichimo's mouth. Han Shua's avatar of death shot a glance at the sighing Bichimos and said with a faint smile, "You have waited for so many years. Why are you so impatient now? You are not me. You still cannot fully understand my feelings. I have told you that there is no need to wait for the next opening of the void. I have a way to bring you into the void. I still find it hard to imagine. You will see." Han Shua kept silent for a moment before he suddenly asked, "What kind of material plane is your homeworld?" "It is a high-level material plane. There are many mighty characters there, experts beyond your imagination." After a short pause, Bichimos stared at Han Shua and continued, "My homeworld is a material plane overflowing with gods. If you wish to advance further, you will come into contact with it sooner or later." Han Shua nodded and pondered for a moment. Soon after, he said with a faint smile, "Perhaps, after I have settled some matters, I will pay your homeworld a visit." During this period of time, Han Shua and Bichimos had conversed quite a bit. From Bichimos, Han Shua learned some things that he had not known before. He understood that the material plane Bichimos resided in was a high-level material plane where gods congregated. The more Han Shua learned about that material plane, the more astonished he became. There was no doubt that Bichimo's homeworld had more experts than Profound Continent in the Abyss realm. Their relationships were also more complicated. For an expert like Han Shua, who was gradually advancing in strength and foresight, it was extremely attractive. However, before the issue of Profound Continent was resolved, Han Shua would not have any other thoughts. "If you come, I will help you." Bichimos looked at Han Shua and made a promise. "My family still has some status. As long as I return, I can still have a say." Han Shua smiled and nodded, thinking that with Bichimo's words, he would at least be able to assimilate into that plane of existence much faster if he really did arrive there in the future. From the looks of it, helping Bichimos this time around would indeed be beneficial. "Right, how much longer do we have to wait?" Bichimos asked. "Soon. I've ordered my subordinates to look for the things they need to look for, and the things that need to be done are basically done." During this period of time, Han Shua's avatar of death could feel thousands upon thousands of strands of faith power slowly flowing into his divine body. This made him understand that after Board, Zinnia, and the others had left, they had indeed started to reclaim the former subjects of the four great demon kings according to his instructions. With the death of the four great demon kings, those demons who had received the light of faith from Han Shuo in the void became the most powerful group of people in the four demon king cities. These people were either the lords of a city or the guards under the direct command of the four great demon kings. With them helping Han Shuo take care of everything, Han Shuo would naturally be able to reap the fruits of his labor without having to worry about it himself. After I leave this place, you can also take over all my people and cities. I won't mind, Bichimo said in a deep voice as he looked at Han Shuo. Han Shuo was stunned. He creased his brows and asked, "That's the power of faith. It's beneficial to your cultivation. Why are you giving it to me?" "Consider it my thanks for activating the interplanar transportation matrix and finding my way home," Bichimos explained. Seeing that Han Shuo was still puzzled, Bichimo's eyes flickered for a moment before he said, "In order to get the four great demon kings to help me, I was willing to give them 4/5 of the Abyss realm. Why would I care about a mere 1/5 of the territory?" After a pause, Bichimos continued, "A material plane with different beliefs is bound to erupt into conflict. It's fine to leave everything to you. But that power of faith can increase your divine power and domain of divinity?" Han Shuo stared fixedly at Bichimos and continued in a deep voice, "Back then, didn't you travel thousands of miles to obtain all the faith in this place? Didn't we already obtain it?" Bichimos countered. Han Shuo was stunned once again. He looked at Bichimos and asked, "What do you mean?" "You are a lich who cultivates in the elemental energy of death. You know how to use that interplanar transportation matrix. Everything you have obtained here is more or less the same." After a pause, Bichimos looked at Han Shuo and said with certainty, "You have two bodies. One cultivates in the elemental energy of death, the other in the edict of destruction. Sooner or later, you will be one of us." "That's not necessarily true." Han Shuo was startled. Soon after, he smiled and shook his head in a non-committal manner. "Once this interplanar transportation matrix is activated, this place will once again be discovered by others. I will naturally explain everything that happened in the Abyss after I return. At that time, some higher-ups will definitely send people to make contact with you. Both of your bodies are on our side. You can't avoid it." Bichimo's green eyes glistened. Seeing that Han Shuo was gradually understanding his meaning, he sighed and said, "I'm telling you all this so that you know what to do. When the time comes, you will eventually have to make a choice." Han Shuo nodded indifferently. With a calm expression, he said, "This place is mine. No one can take it away from me. As for my stance, I will have to see the situation clearly when the time comes." From the information revealed by Bichimos, Han Shuo vaguely understood some things. Coupled with some of the secrets he learned from the skeletal staff, he naturally understood what the overgods of death and destruction had done. Since he cultivated in the elemental energy of death and the edict of destruction, it seemed as though his stance was predetermined from the very beginning. However, apart from that, his main cultivation was demonic arts that had already reached the Nine Changes realm. As the conversation continued, Han Shuo gradually understood more things from Bichimos. Han Shuo had an idea of what might happen in the future. He also understood that if he made good use of the powers of the two overgods, it would be extremely useful to him in the future. Therefore, he couldn't help but be more calculative. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, a few days had passed. On this day, Han Shuo and Bichimos were discussing the application of the Edict of Destruction. Most of the time, it was Bichimos who elaborated while Han Shuo played the role of a listener. Occasionally, Han Shuo, who had gathered several types of evil energies in one body, would also come up with his own unique insights. Even Bichimos was greatly astonished by Han Shuo's unique insight. "He's almost here," Han Shuo's avatar of death suddenly said. "He's finally here." Bichimo's eyes were filled with uncontrollable excitement. He stared at Han Shuo and asked impatiently, "When will the other you arrive?" "He arrived a long time ago." Han Shuo smiled mysteriously. As soon as he finished speaking, a figure suddenly dashed out from the stardust current in front of him. As soon as Han Shua's body arrived, his two avatars moved simultaneously. Two rays of light flashed and simultaneously concealed themselves within Han Shua's body. It's been a few days. You've been in the stardust current all this time? Bichimos asked in astonishment, his face filled with disbelief. Han Shua nodded and smilingly replied, My main body has undergone some changes. I need some peace and time to gradually adapt to the new changes. Bichimos gazed at Han Shua. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, I feel that the current you is stronger than the previous one. Much, much stronger. Han Shua smiled and said nothing. He thought to himself, advancing from the carnal realm to the nine changes realm is a qualitative change. The growth in strength is definitely several times greater. For the time being, Han Shua still didn't know what kind of strength his main body at the nine changes realm possessed. However, the terrifying destructive power of the demonic art's secret techniques he was currently comprehending had filled Han Shua's heart with confidence. After a while, a soft cry suddenly sounded from afar. Soon after, amidst the rustling sounds, a group of people gradually approached from afar and gradually revealed themselves amidst the lush vegetation. At the front were Board and Zinnia, followed by Jasper, Sanguiner, Himana, and Sylph. The few people that Han Shua remembered in the Abyss realm were all present. Board and Zinnia wore respectful and cautious expressions. Along the way, their attitudes were very humble. As for Jasper, Sanguiner, Himana, and Sylph, each and every one of them looked indescribably excited. When they arrived before Han Shua, Jasper's bright eyes stared fixedly at Han Shua and asked in a trembling voice, That matter? Is it true? Master, the matter that Lord Board said, could it be true? Sanguiner was also incomparably excited. He immediately asked after arriving. Although Himana and Sylph did not open their mouths to ask, the astonishment in their eyes was incomparably intense. Their delicate bodies trembled slightly, as though they couldn't quite believe that something had just happened. Han Shua stared blankly at first. When he saw their expressions, his heart jolted and he immediately understood what they were asking about. With a smile on his face, Han Shua nodded and affirmed, From today onwards, I am your god. The 4 great demon kings are dead. Everything they used is now mine. After a short pause, Han Shua cast a faint smile at Bichimos and continued, Before long, even Lord Bichimos' territory will be mine. In other words, the entire Abyss realm, everyone and everything will be mine. Chapter 582. Outside the Abyss, a wide open space was filled with colorful banners. The ravines on the ground formed a complicated and abstruse, irregular pattern. Streaks of bloody shadows danced in the air. Han Shua stood in the middle of it all, eyes closed, not uttering a single word. He just kept shooting out beams of light from his hands, landing on the banners that were scattered all over the ground. A gloomy and chilling aura slowly overflowed from the banners. A bizarre energy attached itself to the bloody shadows and gradually converged into the ravine ahead. Suddenly, a shrill and terrifying howl resounded from the ravine. Evil light shone brilliantly from within, as though something was undergoing a transformation. Outside, Bichimos, Board, Zinnia, and the others stared at the transformation in bewilderment. They had absolutely no idea what was going on. Only Sanguiner, Han Shua's disciple, had a vague idea of what was going on because Han Shua had taught him the general knowledge of demonic arts. What is Han Shua doing? Jasper's brows were slightly knitted as she mumbled to herself. Master is refining a weapon, Sanguiner answered softly when he heard Jasper's muttering. Everyone, including Bichimos, who heard Sanguiner's words, suddenly turned to look at Han Shua. Their eyes brimmed with curiosity. Jasper asked, Refining a weapon? What is refining a weapon? It's more or less the same as forging a weapon, but much more complicated. Apart from some special materials, one also needs demonic yuan and blood essences. It's very miraculous, Sanguiner explained subconsciously as he looked somewhat excitedly at Han Shua, who was shooting out arrows of blood from his fingers. Everyone around him was still baffled by Sanguinar's explanation. Even the last great demon king of the Abyss realm, Bichimos, was deeply frowning as he did not understand what was going on. Sanguinar did not say anything else. His eyes glistened as he concentrated on Han Shuo, refining a demonic weapon with his mind. He imprinted every gesture and incantation of Han Shuo deeply into his mind. Can we really pass through the Stardust Current? Bichimos asked herself inwardly, her green eyes fixed on the mysterious and unfathomable Han Shuo, pinning all her hopes on Han Shuo. Han Shuo is too magical. He always has some incredible performances. Ever since Himana and Sylph learned that Han Shuo had become the lord of the Abyss realm, their admiration for Han Shuo had reached new heights. In their hearts, Han Shuo was omnipotent and the most powerful being in the world. Suddenly, a few beams of dazzling light shot out of Han Shuo's body and landed in the gully beside him. In the blink of an eye, those gullies seemed to connect into lines amidst the light. A few glittering objects, sparkling with dazzling radiance, shot around Han Shuo's body. Streaks of bloody shadows in the surroundings shot onto those objects. In just a moment, those objects had all landed in Han Shuo's palm. Han Shuo, who had been keeping his eyes closed all this time, suddenly opened his eyes and smiled faintly. Han Shuo's body blurred as he flew in a circle. The colorful banners around him all disappeared into his space ring. In a flash, Han Shuo appeared beside Bichimos. He took out a sparkling and translucent bracelet and handed it to Bichimos. He said, "With this, it won't be difficult for me to pass through the Stardust Current." Bichimos was baffled. He reached out to receive the seemingly ordinary trinket and asked doubtfully, "Such a small thing can allow me to pass through the Stardust Current?" Nodding, Han Shuo confidently said, "Don't worry, it will definitely work. This is called a soul ring. It can protect your soul from being corroded by external forces. However, time is limited and you will need to pass through quickly." "How can I believe you?" Bichimos did not use the soul ring so easily. He gently caressed the soul ring with his fingers and sized up Han Shuo with uncertainty. "It's up to you whether you believe me or not. We will go first. You can weigh the pros and cons yourself," Han Shuo said with a faint smile. Soon after, he told Bichimos how to use the soul ring. It wasn't difficult to refine such a small demonic artifact. If Han Shuo wanted to, he could refine it and use it repeatedly. It was just that Han Shuo now considered the Abyss realm as his personal territory and didn't want any gods to easily enter. Since this was the only interplanar transportation matrix and there happened to be a natural barrier in the form of the Stardust Current, Han Shuo would definitely make good use of it. While Bichimos held the soul ring in silence, Han Shuo took out a few more, handed them to Sanguinar, Jasper, Himana, and Sylph respectively, and explained in detail how to use the soul ring. "My lord, we can also leave with you." Bord took a step forward, knelt on one knee in front of Han Shuo, and pleaded. Han Shuo shook his head smilingly and said, "That won't be necessary for the time being. The two of you are the closest to me. You two will stay in the Abyss realm and help me take care of things. Accept the faith of all the people of the Abyss realm. Don't worry, I might return very soon. At that time, I will bring the two of you along with me to help me eradicate some enemies." With the current situation on Profound Continent unclear, Han Shuo wasn't in a hurry to let Bord and Zinnia leave with him. Once they arrived at Profound Continent without a hitch, the Abyss realm would be akin to Han Shuo's enormous back garden. By then, he would be able to do whatever he wanted. The most crucial thing right now was to settle everything in the Abyss realm and change the faith of the people. "Yes, my lord." Bord did not say anything else after hearing Han Shuo's explanation. "The two of you can leave first. Wipe out all the forces in the Abyss realm. The next time I come, I hope that the Abyss realm will no longer have the strength to resist." Han Shuo nodded and instructed. Bord and Zinnia did not say anything else. They respectfully bowed to Han Shuo and silently flew away. Han Shuo raised his head to look at the starry quicksand in midair. His two avatars, each holding a soul ring, suddenly flew out. Just as Han Shuo was about to enter, Han Shuo saw that Bichimos was still hesitating. After thinking for a moment, Han Shu suddenly raised his voice and asked, "Are you leaving or not?" Bichimos kept silent. His green eyes flickered as he looked at the starry quicksand. Han Shuo understood that Bichimos wasn't afraid that Han Shuo would intentionally harm him. Rather, it was because he was too terrified of the might of the starry quicksand and couldn't trust the soul ring refined by Han Shuo. "Master, he's not leaving. Let's leave first." Ever since Sanguiner had followed Han Shuo and experienced a bloody massacre, he had grown bolder and bolder. Now, he was actually not that afraid of the great demon king Bichimos. Sanguiner's body was indeed extraordinary. His tenacious will was gradually manifesting. In contrast, Jasper and the others who had followed Han Shuo for a longer period of time still had fear on their faces when facing Bichimos. Jasper, Himana, and Sylph carefully held the soul ring and raised their heads to look at the starry quicksand. There was still some fear in their eyes. Women are indeed women. When faced with such a situation, they are indeed not as courageous as men. Han Shuo sighed inwardly. After thinking for a moment, Han Shuo instructed Sanguiner, "Use your soul ring. I will bring you to the starry quicksand for a spin." "Yes, master." Sanguiner was as bold as the heavens. Despite clearly knowing the terror of the starry quicksand, he immediately agreed. Under everyone's attentive gazes, Sanguiner bit his finger and dripped a drop of blood onto the soul ring. With a flash of blood-red light, the soul ring concealed itself within Sanguiner's body with a whoosh. Soon after, a faint halo abruptly flashed from Sanguiner's head. Han Shuo grabbed Sanguiner and abruptly dropped his body into the starry quicksand. As soon as the two entered, rays of light fiercely shot out from Sanguiner's head. The shining halo on his head seemed to obstruct the erosion of some kind of power. "I'm fine. Did you see that?" Sanguiner's mouth curved into a mocking smile as he shouted at Bichimos. Bichimos's green eyes were filled with shock as he exclaimed, "He's actually fine. Unbelievable, unbelievable. What are you waiting for?" Han Shuo softly shouted. Bichimos no longer doubted Han Shuo's words. Following Han Shuo's instructions, he activated his soul ring and abruptly shot it towards the starry quicksand. Jasper and the other two girls also did not hesitate. Together with Han Shuo's two avatars, they activated their soul rings and shot them towards the starry quicksand. One figure after another shot into the starry quicksand. With Han Shuo's body leading the way, they once again headed towards the abyss. After traveling for a while, everyone safely passed through the entrance blocked by the starry quicksand. Amidst the exclamations of amazement, they spent some time to return to the Abyss Valley where the interplanar transportation matrix was located. "What's going on? What happened?" Bichimos asked Han Shuo with a look of astonishment on his face as he gazed at the valley where the mist of the boundary seal had completely vanished. "It's nothing. Perhaps I was swept away by the starry quicksand once and temporarily lost my power," Han Shuo casually explained. He reactivated the interplanar transportation matrix and said to Bichimos, "Tell me the coordinates of your hometown's interplanar transportation matrix." Bichimos eagerly reported an extremely long string of numbers. Soon after, Bichimos impatiently walked into the matrix. Before the transmission matrix was activated, Bichimos said, "Han Shuo, if you ever come to my hometown, remember to find me using the method I gave you." "Understood." Han Shuo waved his hand in a carefree manner. Just as he was about to send Bichimos off, he smiled and asked, "One last question. Are you a man or a woman? What do you think?" Bichimos' green eyes seemed to be smiling. His voice was elegant and pleasing to the ear. He seemed to be in a good mood. "Just as I expected." Han Shuo smiled faintly and helped Bichimos activate the transportation matrix. Amidst the dazzling radiance, the surrounding space distorted for a moment. "Let's go too." After refilling the matrix with magic crystal ores, Han Shuo, Jasper, and the others stood in front of the interplanar transportation matrix and activated it. Chapter 583. A ray of light flashed and the scenery around him changed. Although he was prepared, when Han Shuo saw the familiar surroundings, he couldn't help but be pleasantly surprised. He immediately let out a long laugh in the cemetery of death. I'm back. Beneath his feet was that enormous interplanar transportation matrix. Beside it were several storerooms. Outside the wide-open door was the perpetually gloomy sky, the dense element of death, and the ground was covered with white bones. That's right, this is the cemetery of death. Sanguiner, Jasper, and the others walked down from the interplanar transportation matrix. They looked around curiously and clicked their tongues in wonder. Master, is this your hometown? Sanguiner asked as he looked at the white bones on the ground and savored the smell of the air. Yes, but this place is completely shrouded by a boundary. The outside world is the original appearance of this world. Han Shuo couldn't contain his joy. After thinking for a moment, he instructed, I don't know how long I've been gone either. You guys stay here for the time being. I want to take a look at the current situation on Profound Continent. When I have familiarized myself with this place, I will come back and take you away. Jasper, Sanguiner, and the others didn't have any objections to Han Shuo's words. They had long noticed that Han Shuo was excited and knew that Han Shuo was eager to find out the changes in this world after he left. After giving a few instructions to Jasper and the others, Han Shuo had them all leave the interplanar transportation matrix. He once again stood at the center of the transportation matrix and activated it in a small-scale manner. With a flash of light, Han Shuo vanished from the cemetery of death and arrived at a secret chamber excavated deep beneath the City Lord's mansion in Bretel City. The short-range magical matrix formed by the few magical sticks was right beneath the Earth Elite Zombies excavation. After Han Shuo looked around, he discovered that not much had changed. After walking out from the secret chamber, Han Shuo unfolded his consciousness and immediately took in the entirety of Bretel City. Han Shuo didn't know how long he had been gone, but from Han Shuo's observation, Bretel City was obviously more prosperous and powerful than when he left. With a thought, Han Shuo suddenly appeared in the central meeting hall of the City Lord's mansion. Dorcas, Jack, Dick, Falk, Helentina, and the others were in the middle of a heated discussion in the meeting hall when a strange light suddenly flashed past. An imposing figure appeared in the middle of the hall. These leaders of Bretel City were startled. Just as they were about to berate the intruder, they were all dumbfounded. Each and every one of them looked at Han Shuo standing in the center with disbelief. The heated discussions came to an abrupt halt. There's an assassin, take him down. A young, unfamiliar guard captain at the door suddenly let out a shrill howl and charged at Han Shuo without a care for his own safety. Two figures suddenly shot out of nowhere and rushed toward Han Shuo with a murderous aura. They were Elizabeth and Ballins, who cultivated the god-slaying devil path. The two had been hiding in the dark all along. When they sensed the powerful energy coming from the meeting hall, they immediately flew out from the shadows. However, when the two were halfway to the meeting hall, they saw clearly who the intruder was. They forcibly halted their swift and violent momentum and kowtowed in front of Han Shuo with incomparable excitement. Looking at Han Shuo, the two trembled from head to toe, but didn't know what to say for a moment. When the guard captain, who didn't know Han Shuo, saw the two old monsters, Elizabeth and Ballins, suddenly kneeling before Han Shuo, he thought that he had been murdered. He felt a chill in his heart. He knew that he probably wouldn't be able to escape this calamity. However, he still didn't retreat. His sword glinted with silver light as it fiercely stabbed at Han Shuo. Stop! All of a sudden, all the leaders of Bretel City in the meeting hall reacted at the same time and shouted. The guard captain was greatly startled by the violent shout in the meeting hall. Before he could react, Elizabeth had already pressed him down with lightning speed and forced him to kneel before Han Shuo. You blind fool! You even dare to attack the city lord? Are you tired of living? Elizabeth glowered at the guard captain and cursed. The guard captain didn't seem to react for a moment. He said blankly, City Lord? I thought Bretel City doesn't have a city lord? Suddenly, he seemed to recall something. When he saw the respect in the eyes of Elizabeth and Ballins, his body trembled and he said in a trembling voice, Please forgive me, my lord. Please forgive me. Han Shuo waved his hand and didn't reply. He merely looked at everyone in the meeting hall. From Jack to Falk, Han Shuo noticed that there were some obvious changes in everyone. However, the changes weren't too drastic. That big fatty Jack had actually grown a beard. He looked much more mature than before. He naturally exuded the aura of a person of high status. Dorcas was still as solemn as ever. His face was filled with the unswerving determination of having weathered many hardships. Valentina was still as beautiful as ever. Her fiery eyes were looking at Han Shuo as though she wanted to melt Han Shuo. After looking at everyone, Han Shuo heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He knew that he hadn't been away for too long. Ever since he returned to Profound Continent, Han Shuo had always been a little afraid. Back when he was in the space-time discontinuum, Han Shuo had a feeling that time and space were in disarray. He feared that the time he spent in the Abyss Realm had accelerated too much for the gears of time on Profound Continent. If the time difference between the two material planes was too great, and he returned to Profound Continent only to find that everyone he was familiar with had died of old age, it would be an unbearable blow to him. Therefore, ever since he returned to Profound Continent, he had been worried about this. Looking at the faces of the crowd, although there had been some changes, it seemed that not too much time had passed. Han Shuo heaved a genuine sigh of relief. How long have I been gone? Under the excited gazes of the crowd, Han Shuo put on a faint smile and finally took the initiative to speak. 5 years. It's been another 5 years. You punk. Where the hell have you been this time? Jack suddenly shrieked. His fat body stomped towards Han Shuo, his fist fiercely pounding on Han Shuo's chest, as though trying to express the excitement of reuniting with Han Shuo after such a long time. Although the others were also indescribably excited, they only expressed their emotions through their expressions and eyes. They did not vent their emotions with their actions like Jack. After all, Jack and Han Shuo had known each other since they were in the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. The relationship between the two was deeper than the others. Although Valentina, the beautiful magus who had long considered herself to be Han Shuo's woman, was also intimate with Han Shuo, she was too embarrassed to throw herself into Han Shuo's embrace in public. She could only use the fiery passion in her eyes to tell Han Shuo how excited she was. 5 years. Luckily it's only 5 years. Hee. Han Shuo laughed heartily as he allowed Jack to pound on his chest. Only 5 years? How many 5 years does a person have? You scoundrel, you threw such a big mess to us, yet you don't care about it at all. You disappear for a few years when you have nothing better to do. That's too much. After pounding for a while, Jack saw that Han Shuo was indifferent and his fat hands were aching faintly. He had no choice but to give up on venting his emotions. He glared fiercely at Han Shuo and complained. Suddenly, 2 figures flew over from afar. Han Shuo knitted his brows and looked outside in surprise. In the blink of an eye, the 2 figures had already arrived at the meeting hall. It was the rank 5 Emperor of the Flames and the old monster Stadholm. When the 2 saw Han Shuo appear, they were obviously even more shocked than Han Shuo. They looked at Han Shuo in disbelief. I thought you were already killed by the 6-horned tribal king of the soul race? Han Shuo and the old monster Stadholm said in unison as they looked at each other. As soon as they finished speaking, the 2 looked at each other in dismay. Soon after, they burst into laughter. Where's my child? Where did you take my child? The Emperor of the Flames yelled at Han Shuo with her shrewish voice as soon as she arrived. Han Shuo was stunned. He looked at the shrewish Emperor of the Flames and the handsome Stadholm with a bitter smile and asked, Why are you 2 here? What happened after I left? It's a long story. The old monster Stadholm put on a faint smile. He looked at the crowd of Bretel City in the meeting hall and said, 3 years ago, a great war that engulfed the entire continent erupted on Profound Continent. Many interesting things have happened over the past few years. Currently, the entire continent is in the flames of war driven by some people with ulterior motives. It's a long story. Hey, kid, hurry up and tell me, where's my child? The Emperor of the Flames, who was concerned about Fire Elite Zombie, started to yell again. Since this shrewish Emperor of the Flames was in Bretel City, Han Shuo believed that he must have helped Bretel City a lot over the years. The rank 5 Emperor of the Flames was a demigod existence. Even after 5 years, he was still a demigod existence. However, once Fire Elite Zombie, who was currently digesting a low god of fire elemental energy, completely digested Cecrop's energy, he would absolutely surpass the rank 5 Emperor of the Flames. He's currently cultivating, and will be able to see you after some time. After a short pause, Han Shua looked at the shrewish middle-aged woman with a beaming smile and said, "The next time you see him, you will discover how much he has changed, much more than you can imagine." Humph, deliberately mystifying things. "I'm going back first. Take good care of that kid for me." The rank 5 Emperor of the Flames seemed to have come to the meeting hall to protect the crowd. But when she saw that the person who came was Han Shua, she lost all interest and flew out at top speed again after finishing those words. From the behavior of Elizabeth and Balance, as well as the arrival of Statholm the Old Monster and the Lord of the Flames, Han Shua knew that Bretel City wasn't as secure and stable as he had imagined. It seemed that they were guarding against something. "Statholm, tell me about the current situation." Han Shua bunched his brows and asked the Old Monster. Chapter 584. For the next 5 years, Profound Continent was engulfed in the flames of war. Lancelot Empire, Kasi Empire, Brute Merchant Alliance, Angela Empire, Odin Empire, and many other empires, big or small, all participated in this war. The original 7 Grand Duchies were successfully occupied by Lancelot Empire's sudden attack and Helentina and Bert Zeely's secret rebellion. Odin Empire, the strongest empire on the continent, joined forces with Kasi Empire and continuously expanded their territory. Many small countries in the vicinity were nibbled away by the two empires. Even the other Angela Empire had occupied more than half of its territory. The Brute Merchant Alliance was also in a precarious situation. They had to painstakingly resist the encroachment of Odin Empire. Not long after Lancelot Empire occupied the 7 Grand Duchies, it welcomed the invasion of the Empire of Orcs. This time, the offensive of the Empire of Orcs was much more ferocious than in previous years. Firenze, the commander of the Howling Legion, found it extremely difficult to defend the southern border. Most of Lancelot Empire's military forces were stationed at the southern border. The Empire of Orcs kept attacking at the southern border, while Kasi Empire took the opportunity to attack Lancelot Empire. Lancelot Empire, which had taken down the 7 Grand Duchies with great difficulty, simply did not have the time to digest the aftermath of the war before it suffered heavy losses from being attacked from both front and back. The unbridled invasion of the Orcs caused the citizens of the Empire to panic. On the contrary, Bretel City was relatively stable. Under the management of Jack, Dorcas, and the others, the city became more and more prosperous. The territory that originally belonged to the 7 Grand Duchies was now managed by Jack, Dorcas, and the others. Among them, Dorcas's military talent had been recognized by everyone. He had become a military genius of Bretel City who was on par with Firenze. Bretel City and the 7 Grand Duchies were a natural barrier to the east of Lancelot Empire, facing the threat of the Brute Merchant Alliance. For the past few years, due to the constant pressure from the mighty Odin Empire, the Brute Merchant Alliance and Bretel City lived in harmony. They even secretly cooperated with each other to resist the mighty threat of Odin Empire. Through Statholm's description, Han Shua gradually gained a better understanding of the overall situation on Profound Continent. Han Shua also slowly sorted out the relationships between countries. After Statholm described the situation of the continent, Han Shua frowned and began to carefully observe the old monster Statholm. Statholm the Old Monster had completely digested the origin crystal of fighting aura many years ago. Now, his soul had fused with the origin crystal of fighting aura. Although he had yet to reach the realm of base god, he wasn't far from it. At Han Shua's realm, he understood that the fighting aura cultivated on Profound Continent did not belong to the 12 mainstream forces. Light, darkness, earth, fire, wind, water, lightning, death, the 8 elemental forces, and fate, space, time, life, and destruction. The 4 elemental forces were the 4 elemental forces. Combat aura was a type of power that was formed from a mixture of light and air. Similar to the summoning element and Dadra's plunder ability, it was an unorthodox type of power. However, perhaps due to the fact that fighting aura contained the element of light. In addition to the fact that air was one of the more abundant elements, there were quite a few people who cultivated in the energy of fighting aura on various material planes. Apart from the 12 fundamental forces, the energy of fighting aura was the most populous. Back when Han Shuo was in Tarag Canyon and encountered the soul race, he had seen 12 energy spheres that could fuse with souls. However, those 12 spheres did not correspond to the 12 fundamental forces. For instance, the two relatively special energies of life and fate were not present in those 12 spheres. Instead, there was the energy of fighting aura cultivated by Statholm the Old Monster, and the energy of summoning. Although fighting aura was not one of the 12 fundamental forces, the fact that there were quite a number of people who cultivated it on various material planes proved that this energy had its own uniqueness. It seemed that Statholm the Old Monster's luck was pretty good. Not only did he successfully evade the pursuit of the six-horned tribal king of the soul race, but he also successfully fused the energy sphere with his soul. Did the Church of Light and Calamity Church make any big moves in recent years? How did you escape the pursuit of that six-horned tribal king back then? Also, why are you here? After Statholm described the current situation on the continent, Han Shuo pondered for a moment and asked again. The old monster casually pulled a chair and sat down. When he saw that Han Shuo was still standing there proudly, he gestured for Han Shuo to sit opposite him. Only then did he explain, back then, that six-horned tribal king had a great battle with that saintess at the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. After the two of us parted, I immediately went to the northernmost region of the continent to cultivate. I'm not sure what happened after that, but that six-horned tribal king did not come looking for me. After a short pause, Statholm looked at Han Shuo and continued, what happened after that was much simpler. After my soul fused with the crystal of fighting aura, that six-horned tribal king could no longer find me. At that time, the 7 Grand Duchies had already been occupied by the Lancelot Empire, and you were the master of Bretel City. Therefore, I couldn't say much. However, I was, after all, the state preceptor of the Verdun dynasty, and the citizens of the 7 Grand Duchies were also my citizens. Therefore, I decided to stay in the 7 Grand Duchies, which could be considered as doing my best. After hearing Statholm's words, Han Shuo nodded to indicate that he understood. Statholm the Old Monster had been the protector of the 7 Grand Duchies for many years. Even though the 7 Grand Duchies had been recovered by the Lancelot Empire, Statholm was the only one within the 7 Grand Duchies. He believed that the Lancelot Empire and Bretel City would not do anything to the citizens of the 7 Grand Duchies out of respect for him. Have the Calamity Church and the Church of Light been peaceful these past few years? Han Shuo asked again. The old monster forced a smile and shook his head. He looked at Han Shuo and said, the incessant wars on Profound Continent these days have very strong religious influences behind them. The Calamity Church, the Church of Light, the Shrine of Ice, and the Druidic Order, these 4 major religious organizations on Profound Continent, not only have they all participated in the wars, there are also some other small religions in disarray. The Odin Empire, the strongest on the continent, is strongly supported by the Church of Light. Following the Odin Empire's conquest of various countries, the number of believers of the Church of Light has also increased. Kasi Empire is backed by the Shrine of Ice. Angela Empire is backed by the Calamity Church, and your Lancelot Empire is currently supported by the Druidic Order. The way I see it, the reason why the flames of war on Profound Continent are being incited is because of the 4 major religions. After experiencing the Abyss Realm and becoming a god, Han Shuo had a clear understanding of the struggles between the 4 major religions. He naturally understood that the struggle between the 4 major religions was inseparable from the competition for the power of faith. Han Shuo reckoned that the Calamity Church was a little more ruthless. This kind of incessant slaughter, destruction, and death should be exactly what they were happy to see. It seems that there are religious influences behind every country. Do the Empire of Orcs and the Brute Merchant Alliance have any religious support? Han Shuo creased his brows and inquired. The Empire of Orcs believes in the Orc god. As for the Brute Merchant Alliance, the Soul Race is currently pulling the strings behind the scenes. The Tarag Canyon in the territory of the Brute Merchant Alliance has now become the Holy Land of the Brute Merchant Alliance. Don't you think this world is very interesting? Stratholme the old monster smiled bitterly. He could not understand the current situation. So that's how it is. Hee. Although it is a little surprising, it's not hard to accept. Han Shuo understood what those people were fighting for. The Brute Merchant Alliance could be considered a major power. The six-horned tribal king of the Soul race naturally possessed outstanding strength. It was indeed not difficult for him to gain the trust of the merchants of the Brute Merchant Alliance. Then, what about our Bredel city? Han Shua's eyes were glistening as he stared at Stratholme the old monster. He smiled and said, "Although your strength has grown by a large margin, you have yet to become a god. It is still impossible for you to obtain the power of faith." Spreading his hands, Stratholme the old monster helplessly said, "Naturally, I do not have the qualifications to obtain the power of faith. However, that beautiful woman you brought out from the underground world has been wantonly promoting Spider Goddess Rose in Brettel City. She has even established several shrines. At present, there are indeed many believers of Spider Goddess Rose in Brettel City and the Seven Grand Duchies." Upon hearing these words, Han Shua's face turned cold. He coldly shouted, "Although she has changed her body, name, and identity, she is still Adele. I didn't expect that she would dare to cause trouble in my territory. She must be tired of living." After a short pause, Han Shua creased his brows and looked at Stratholme the old monster. He said, "Others may not know of her intentions, but do you not? Why didn't you kill her?" Stratholme forced a smile and shook his head. He said, "Although I can kill her, I still have to give you face, don't I?" "What do you mean?" Han Shua asked puzzledly. "She considers herself to be your woman. Moreover, she is on good terms with your other women. Moreover, she is deeply trusted by His Majesty the King of Lancelot Empire. How can I make a move on her?" After a short pause, Stratholme's brows were tightly knitted as he continued, "Moreover, this woman is not simple at all. She seems to have experts protecting her. Even I have some misgivings. She does have some ability. However, she has reached her limit," Han Shua said with a cold smile. There were many citizens in Brettel City and the Seven Grand Duchies. The power of faith gathered would be a considerable amount. As the Lord of Brettel City, Han Shua would absolutely not allow others to steal what belonged to him. Chapter 585. Had it not been for the Primordius Dragon cutting off the interplanar passageway to Han Shua, Adele would have been killed 5 years ago. After 5 years, Han Shua did not expect that the unremarkable Adele would cause such a huge ruckus in Brettel City. This was rather out of Han Shua's expectations. Through the narration of Stratholme the old monster, Jack, and the others, Han Shua was able to quickly understand the current situation. With Han Shua's strength expanding to such an extent, Han Shua did not take any of the threats on Profound Continent to heart. Han Shua unfolded his consciousness and circled around Brettel City. Han Shua immediately sensed the shrine of Spider Goddess Rose. At the center of a palace at the summit of Mount Silk was a mysterious statue of Spider Goddess Rose. Some believers dressed in black robes were devoutly prostrating themselves in worship towards the statue of Spider Goddess Rose, selflessly offering their faith. Among them was an elegant purple-haired young lady who stood indifferently in front of the statue of Spider Goddess. Specks of demonic light sprinkled from her hand onto those worshipping believers in front of her. At this time of war, the people at the bottom of society needed an object of faith. Adele, who considered herself to be Han Shua's woman, used extraordinary means to gain the trust of Emily, Phoebe, and the other ladies. She was also highly regarded by Lawrence. Under her propaganda, Spider Goddess Rose became the object of faith for many citizens of Brettel City. The palace on the summit of Mount Silk was currently the largest shrine in the territory of Brettel City. For the past few years, Spider Goddess Lolth had performed several miracles, causing those believers to spread the word willingly. They even took the initiative to persuade the commoners in the surroundings to become believers of Goddess Lolth. In the forbidden area behind the shrine, Adele, who had changed her identity, was sitting cross-legged at the center of a magical matrix in the shape of a spider web. The element of darkness around her was dense. Adele had a solemn expression and faint dark radiance was flickering on her body. All of a sudden, an intense palpitation rose in Adele's heart, as though a terrifying crisis was descending from the heavens. In the blink of an eye, 5 years had passed, and Adele had become a demigod through her own efforts and the spider goddess love. In Bretel City, by virtue of her special identity, she had befriended the important figures around Han Shuo and became an extremely special existence. She believed that there shouldn't be anyone in Bretel City who could threaten her. What's going on? Puzzled, Adele slowly opened her eyes and muttered to herself. She opened her eyes, and the spider silk threads around her disappeared into her body one by one. Above the empty hall, there was a huge spider web covering it. A few shadows that had been entangled in the spider web slid down and turned into 5 women with blank eyes. "Sir, what are your orders?" one of the women asked in a numb and lifeless voice. "Nothing. I just feel a little uneasy." Adele frowned and said indifferently. Every time she saw these expressionless faces, Adele felt a chill and uneasiness in her heart. However, Adele knew in her heart that she needed these helpers who seemed to have appeared out of thin air. "With us here, no one can hurt you. As long as you do what you should do, you will be fine," the woman in the lead said in a lifeless voice. "When will the goddess bestow me new power?" Although Adele was afraid, she still needed to ask clearly when it concerned her own interests. "When all the people of Bretel City acknowledge the existence of the goddess and all the power of faith belongs to the goddess, you will be able to obtain new power," the woman in the lead replied in the same lifeless voice. "You will probably never have the chance." A cold voice suddenly sounded from outside the hall. A majestic figure walked in step by step. "Brian, it's you. It's actually you," Adele cried out in surprise. Her eyes were filled with hatred as she shrieked hysterically, "You didn't die. You actually didn't die. Very good, very good. Haha." Looking at Adele shrieking and laughing, Han Shua's expression was cold and detached as he said, "What? Not going to continue to play tricks? Back then, I couldn't kill you, so I had to conceal my identity. Now, only death awaits you. What else do I need to conceal?" Adele glared at Han Shuo resentfully. That familiar aura reappeared on her body. She said word by word, "Everything I have done is for you to pay the price." "With just you?" Han Shuo looked at Adele coldly and taunted. "It's not me." Adele took a deep breath, pointed at the women beside her with hollow eyes, and said, "It's them." While Adele was speaking, the 5 women with hollow eyes and pale faces had unknowingly surrounded him. The dark energy on their bodies was slowly being released. The 5 women all cultivated in the elemental energy of darkness and possessed at least demigod strength. Han Shuo could sense a little evil divine energy from Spider Goddess rose from the 5 of them. Nodding, Han Shuo said in a callous voice, "No wonder even the old monster Statholm is somewhat apprehensive. So it's because you have these guys by your side." "Scared? Haha." Adele laughed hysterically, but her eyes were staring venomously at Han Shuo. She said, "It's good that you're not dead. I want to watch you die slowly." 5 years ago, when Han Shuo cultivated demonic arts to the carnal realm, he already possessed demigod strength. Every increase in demonic arts would increase his strength 10-fold, or even 100-fold. Now that Han Shuo was at the 9 Changes realm, he did not know what realm his true strength had reached. However, when surrounded by the 5 women, Han Shuo clearly did not feel the slightest sense of danger. In Han Shuo's eyes, the 5 seemingly lifeless women were like ants that could be squashed to death at any time. "I won't waste any more time with you," Han Shuo said coldly and suddenly made his move. A violent evil energy suddenly erupted from his body. The 5 expressionless women who had surrounded Han Shuo suddenly trembled. Their strength wasn't on the same level at all. There was no joy in slaughtering them. Violent, evil energy was released from Han Shuo's 2 hands. The air around him crackled as a few streaks of blood flashed across the dark hall. The 5 women who hadn't even had the chance to make a move had already become truly lifeless, ice-cold corpses. The demonic blades unsheathed and rested on Adele's smooth neck. Han Shua looked coldly at the horrified Adele and said, 5 years ago, I could easily kill you. 5 years later, you still don't have the slightest chance. All your efforts have been exchanged for a predestined ending, death again. No, I can't accept this. Adele shrieked like a madwoman. She stared resentfully at Han Shua and said, Why? Why did you become so strong? Why is it that even the divine servant carefully cultivated by the spider goddess is powerless to resist? Adele was so agitated that she didn't even care about the demonic blades resting on her neck. She couldn't help but shake her head as she yelled. Her neck was already stained with blood. Han Shua didn't kill Adele immediately. This woman who used his name to recruit believers for the spider goddess still had an important mission that she hadn't completed. The demonic blades suddenly retracted. Han Shua's left hand lost its sharpness and became smooth again. Grabbing Adele's hair, Han Shua dragged the battered and exhausted Adele like a dead dog and walked straight to the front of the hall. What are you doing? What are you doing? Adele was still yelling crazily. Han Shua didn't pay any attention to her. He dragged this crazy woman all the way to the largest spider goddess shrine in Bretel City. At this moment, some believers of the spider goddess were still kneeling humbly, worshipping the altar in front of them. Saintess. The voice came from the mouth of the beautiful young lady presiding over the shrine. Looking at the shrine lord who was being dragged over like a dead dog, the young lady couldn't restrain the fear in her heart and screamed, Villain, put down the saintess. The believers who were worshipping suddenly shouted crazily when they noticed the changes in the shrine. With a wave of his hand, a bright invisible boundary blocked all of them. Paying no heed to their craziness, Han Shua threw Adele onto the altar in the center and activated the altar with great familiarity. Hundreds and thousands of spider webs darted out like little snakes and immediately wrapped around Adele. Rays of dazzling light, accompanied by the descent of a mysterious energy, appeared on the body of Adele, who was wrapped in spider webs at the center of the altar. In the next moment, Adele's eyes brightened as she fiercely stared at Han Shua. The look in her eyes was unfamiliar and evil. Who are you? How dare you ruin my business? Adele suddenly spoke in a somewhat unfamiliar voice. I am the Lord of Bretel City. If you want to steal the power of faith that belongs to me, come here yourself. Han Shua said indifferently as he looked at Adele with cold eyes and sensed the infusion of divine soul from who knows how many material planes away. Adele stared deeply at Han Shua for a while. After a moment of silence, she suddenly said, I will come here myself. It's just as well. It's time to settle the debt from back then, Han Shua shouted. After she finished speaking, Adele's eyes slowly closed. Blood flowed out of her 7 orifices. Seeing that Adele's mission was completed, Han Shua stretched out his hand and lightly patted her forehead, thoroughly erasing her soul. Chapter 586. A few years ago, when Han Shua was assassinating a Grand Duke, his mind was suddenly bewitched, and his consciousness was completely taken over by lust. Han Shua came to his senses and found a place to resist a force that forcibly changed his mind, paying a huge price. After so many years, Han Shua, who had entered the divine realm, had long since understood that the force originated from Spider Goddess Rose. However, because they were separated by many material planes, and he had used the divine energy that Adele had planted to trigger it, Rose's power had been greatly reduced. That was why she was unable to control Han Shua. Han Shua had always kept this score in mind. His murderous intent towards Spider Goddess Rose had long since arisen. Now that he had returned to Bretel City, he heard from the old monster Statholm that Adele had established a shrine in his territory and stole the power of faith from the people of Bretel City. It was only natural that Han Shua would fly into a rage. With Adele as a medium and the altar at the center of the shrine, Han Shua successfully conveyed his anger to Spider Goddess Rose. After Adele's soul was obliterated by Han Shua, there was no longer any possibility of resurrection. Her corpse fell limply into a pool of blood, with all signs of life completely gone. Han Shuo casually let go and pointed a finger at the center of the altar where Adele was lying. A ruthless energy was suddenly released, and the altar abruptly shattered into pieces. After his avatars of death and destruction had ascended to godhood, Han Shuo was well aware of some of the methods that gods use to collect the power of faith. The shattered altar was used to gather the power of faith, and was also the key for Spider Goddess Rose to communicate with her direct believers. Now that the altar was destroyed, as long as there was no powerful believer to rebuild it, Rose would no longer be able to communicate with her direct believers. For example, Han Shuo, a low god of death, could still obtain the power of faith from the Abyss realm even though they were separated by many material planes. As for those direct believers whom Han Shuo had sprinkled with the light of faith in the Abyss, Han Shuo could even vaguely sense their consciousness. Faith was an illusory but real special substance. Through faith, Han Shuo could establish a mysterious connection with his believers. If those believers constructed an altar in the Abyss realm, they could even establish a direct connection with Han Shuo across countless material planes. Han Shuo could also exert some of his power on those believers. Back at the slave auction house in Valen City, the necromancer had used the blood altar to successfully establish a connection with the three-eyed demon god. He had used the bones and blood pool to construct the demon god silhouette. This was the same principle. After Adele died, Han Shuo also destroyed the altar of sin. However, those believers who were blocked by his invisible boundary were still glaring at Han Shuo with hatred, as though they were ready to charge and tear Han Shuo to pieces. I am the city lord of Bretel City. That woman was the root of a rebellion. I have killed her. From today onwards, Bretel City and the 7 Grand Duchies are not allowed to have believers who believe in Spider Goddess Rose, Han Shuo coldly said as he looked at the citizens of Bretel City. However, after Han Shuo finished his speech, he discovered that the hatred in their eyes was still there. It seemed that they had not given up their faith in Spider Goddess Rose just because he was the city lord of Bretel City. Under normal circumstances, it would be very difficult for an ordinary citizen to walk away from this kind of imperceptible influence once they handed over their faith. Although Han Shuo had a great reputation, his influence was far inferior to that of Rose, whom they had worshipped for several years. Looking at the hatred in their eyes, Han Shuo found it rather troublesome. Unless Spider Goddess Rose died, or if they themselves realized the incompetence of their believers, there was really no way for them to walk away from this kind of influence. These people were also citizens of Bretel City. Under Adele's bewitchment, these people had been tormented to a great extent. It was impossible to kill them. It seemed that he could only slowly purge the influence of those souls. From today onwards, all the temples of the Spider Goddess in the vicinity of Bretel City will be destroyed. No one is allowed to worship them, Han Shuo bluntly ordered. Every time a believer worshipped in a temple, it would deepen the believer's reliance on the God they believed in, and the influence on their souls would be even more profound. Due to the strength of an individual's willpower, as well as the length of time a believer had to worship, the degree of reliance a believer had on the God they believed in was different. For example, the fanatics of the Radiant Church were the most paranoid believers. For these people, the God they believed in was their everything. Unless the God they believed in died, no matter how hard they tried to twist their beliefs, they would never be able to change their beliefs. Such people would destroy all those who did not share their beliefs, even at the cost of their own lives. Towards such people, the only way was to kill them and eliminate all evil consequences. The believers in Bretel City, on one hand, had a short amount of time, and on the other hand, didn't have any forceful guidance. They were far from the level of paranoid fanatics. As long as Han Shuo put an end to it step by step and slowly guided them, they would one day walk away from the influence of Spider Goddess Rose. After returning from Mount Silk, Han Shuo met with Jack, Dorcas, and the others one by one to understand the situation of the people around him. When he was alone with Helentina, Helen stared at Han Shuo with fiery eyes and said softly, "It's been 5 years. You've been gone for 5 years. You're really heartless." It had been 5 years since they last met, but Helen was still as dazzling as ever. Her endless longing for Han Shuo had tormented Helen for 5 years. Now that they were alone, she finally couldn't contain her excitement and threw herself into Han Shua's wide embrace. Holding Helen in his arms, smelling the faint fragrance of the beauty in his arms and feeling her deep affection that was as deep as the sea, Han Shua smiled tenderly and said, "Aren't I back now?" The temperature of Helen's tender body rose unknowingly. A kind of lust seemed to be growing in the dark room. Helen's body was boiling hot in Han Shua's arms. She hugged Han Shua's broad back and couldn't control herself after reuniting after such a long time. She took the initiative to stand on her tiptoes and eagerly asked for Han Shua's favor. As soon as their mouths and teeth touched, it was as though lightning was communicating with fire. The two could no longer control their lust. Amidst the fragrance, Han Shua lifted Helen up by the waist. As she panted, he tore her fiery red magic robe apart, and his big hands climbed onto her towering soft body that was as warm as jade. "Oh, I didn't expect that I would wait for 5 years. Brian, give it to me. I don't want to wait any longer." Helen hugged Han Shua with all her strength and cried tears of joy. A series of scenes seemed to have happened just yesterday. Scenes of warm and ambiguous flirting in Helen City, walking hand in hand with various beautiful scenic spots, appeared in Han Shua's mind one after another. Feeling the passion of the beauty in his arms, Han Shua's hands became more and more unbridled. Finally, he tore Helen's soft and smooth silk bra apart and took off Helen's cicada's wings that were as thin as a cicada's wings. For the next few days, under Han Shua's orders, the shrines of the spider goddess in Bretel City and the 7 Grand Duchies were all cleared out. Those who were stubborn were mercilessly beheaded. The believers of the spider goddess Rose were ordered not to continue worshipping, not to pray, and not to privately build sacrificial altars to worship. At the same time, under Han Shua's instructions, the destroyed shrines of the spider goddess were transformed into statues of the city lord. The statues were then spread to all major cities to publicize the city lord's glorious achievements. Drawing on the respect and worship of the citizens of Bretel City, he began to consolidate their faith through some simple rituals, making them willingly offer everything to him. It was Han Shua's avatar of destruction that received the power of faith from the citizens of Bretel City and the 7 Grand Duchies. With the experience of his avatar of death, and having consulted Bichimos on some of the profound mysteries of the Edict of Destruction outside the Void, Han Shua's avatar of destruction could now successfully release the domain of divinity and absorb the power of faith. You've become a god? Over the past few days, Han Shua's series of thunderous actions in Bretel City had brought about many changes in the city. When Statholm the Old Monster became aware of Han Shua's actions, he finally sought out Han Shua alone. His eyes shone with a strange light as soon as he saw Han Shua, and he inquired in a deep voice. Over the past few days, Han Shua had utterly destroyed the arrangements Adele had made over the past 5 years, as though he was crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Furthermore, he had begun to publicize his great achievements in Bretel City and the 7 Grand Duchies. He had used some means to display his might, causing the citizens who had long since worshipped him to willingly offer their faith to him. Although Statholm the Old Monster had yet to become a god, he knew that only a true god needed the power of faith. After witnessing Han Shua's actions, Statholm came to a shocking conclusion in his heart. Han Shua had become a god. Therefore, he urgently sought out Han Shua, impatient to prove whether his judgment was correct or not. Looking at Statholm, who was eager to seek confirmation, Han Shua put on a faint smile and calmly admitted, "That's right, I have become a god." Although Statholm had a premonition in his heart, he was still indescribably shocked when he heard Han Shua's affirmation. Statholm was silent for a long while. Soon after, he looked at Han Shua with some embarrassment and asked, "Can you give me some experience?" Han Shua laughed involuntarily and replied straightforwardly, "No problem." After a short pause, he added, "However, the most important breakthrough still depends on yourself." Han Shua had long had a favorable impression of Statholm. Currently, the latter was only a step away from the realm of base god. Therefore, Han Shua was very willing to help him. Chapter 587. Are you really willing to help me? Statholm was rather surprised that Han Shuo agreed so readily. He himself felt that it was rather abrupt when he said those words. In his heart, he did not think that Han Shuo would really help him. After all, he knew very well what it meant to become a god. He believed that such a great benefit would not be so easily obtainable given the thin friendship between him and Han Shuo. Han Shuo found the old monster's astonishment rather amusing. From Han Shuo's point of view, Statholm was merely a demigod who was about to break through to base god. There was still an insurmountable distance between him and a true low god. In Han Shuo's eyes, a base god would not affect him in the slightest. That was because most of the demons in the Abyss realm were base gods, although they did not rely on their own strength to break through. To Han Shuo, who had two low god avatars, a mere base god was nothing at all. Back in Tarag Canyon, Han Shuo and Statholm fought a common enemy. Han Shuo knew that Statholm was someone worth befriending. Over the past few years, Statholm's mission of serving as a guardian in the vicinity of Bredel City had given Han Shuo even more favorable impressions of Statholm. After your soul fused with the crystal of fighting aura, you have formed a soul of element. If you wish to advance further, you will have to work hard on your body. As a swordsman, the fighting aura that you have been cultivating is actually stored within your body. From this aspect, it can be seen that you are blessed by nature. It will be very easy for you to cultivate a body of element, Han Shuo said slowly as he looked at Statholm. After his trip to the Abyss realm, Han Shuo had gained a better understanding of the cultivation methods of both worlds. Combining his understanding of cultivation in both worlds, Han Shuo discovered that Statholm, who cultivated fighting aura, had a similar cultivation method to the people of the Abyss realm. They both cultivated fighting aura within their bodies and did not pay attention to the cultivation of the soul. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be too difficult for Statholm to form the body of element after he cultivated the soul of element. With that thought in mind, Han Shuo's consciousness slowly probed the condition of the old monster's body. He immediately discovered that the old monster's body was indeed filled with fighting aura. However, the fighting aura was concentrated in a spot on his chest and did not spread to his skin or bones. With just one look, Han Shuo immediately understood where the problem was. Statholm had long been accustomed to the cultivation method of fighting aura on Profound Continent. Although he had a unique advantage in the formation of the body of element compared to the average magus, it was precisely because of this that he had a fixed train of thought. He was unable to jump out of the shackles he had been under all along and look at the problem in a new way. Seeing that Han Shuo was staring at him with sparkling eyes without saying a word, Statholm felt flustered. Even though the old monster knew that Han Shuo was looking at him with good intentions, he still felt uncomfortable under the pressure Han Shuo was putting on him. Statholm awkwardly moved his fingers and asked, "Is there a problem?" Nodding with a smile, Han Shuo did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. This is how you have always cultivated your fighting aura. Starting from your heart, it will suddenly erupt through your limbs. However, the formation of the body of element requires you to spread your fighting aura to every part of your body. When your body is completely filled with fighting aura, that is when your body of element will be formed. It's that simple? The old monster was stunned. It's that simple, Han Shuo affirmed. After thinking for a moment, he creased his brows and said, "However, to spread fighting aura to every part of your body is not an easy task. First, your body must be able to withstand it. You have to figure this out yourself. I can't help you." After hearing Han Shuo's words, Statholm seemed to have understood something. He pondered in silence. After a while, Statholm looked at Han Shuo with a puzzled expression and said, "You said that you have become a god, but I don't feel the aura of a god from you. What's going on?" "That's simple," Han Shuo said coolly. With a thought, his two avatars suddenly flew out from his body. His domain of divinity suddenly unfolded, leaving only the elemental energy of death and the bizarre edict of destruction in the surroundings. A suffocating and terrifying energy instantly enveloped Statholm. Cold sweat trickled down his back. Statholm was more afraid than surprised. Under the domain of divinity that Han Shuo had deliberately released, he felt a sense of helplessness, as though he was facing a towering mountain. Fighting aura was also one of the elemental energies. Although it was not mainstream, it was related to the element of light and air. However, when Han Shuo unfolded his two domains of divinity, Statholm the old monster immediately could not feel the existence of the fighting aura that he relied on for survival. This feeling made Statholm's heart palpitate. So, this is the power of a god. The oppressive force of a god's domain alone is not something an ordinary person can withstand. How terrifying! Statholm struggled to resist that feeling of helplessness. After a long while, he finally squeezed out these words with a red face. After withdrawing his domain of divinity, Han Shuo's two avatars no longer deliberately released the powerful pressure. His main body smiled and said, "Do you believe me now?" Nodding, Statholm's eyes shone with a scorching light. He looked deeply at Han Shuo and asked curiously, "But how come you have 3 bodies? Could it be that after becoming a god, one can have an additional body?" "No, only I can do that. Don't try it rashly. Otherwise, only death awaits you." Han Shuo shrugged and explained, "You know, I have practiced another kind of martial technique. This martial technique can bring me some unimaginable transformations. However, this transformation is only useful to me, and only I can master it." "You are so lucky." Statholm looked at Han Shuo enviously. Soon after, his eyes turned resolute as he said, "All right, I know how to make a breakthrough. With you in Brettel City, I reckon I don't need to worry about it anymore. I will immediately return to Stranglethorn Valley to train. I hope I can break through to your realm one day." After witnessing the terrifying power of Han Shuo's domain of divinity, Statholm had an indescribable expectation for this realm. He had always been tirelessly pursuing greater power. After this incident, when he was pointed in the right direction by Han Shuo, he immediately became impatient. Han Shuo understood Statholm's feelings. Therefore, he did not stop him and allowed him to leave Brettel City and go to Stranglethorn Valley to train. It's a pity that Tanai in the Dark Abyss didn't cultivate fighting aura. I didn't get anything suitable for you. Otherwise, I might have given it to you. Han Shuo sighed softly and said to himself after Statholm the old monster had left. After the trip to the Dark Abyss was washed away by the Stardust Current, Han Shuo's avatar successfully absorbed the energy of numerous boundaries and seals, broken magical matrices, and broke through to the 9 Changes realm. He carefully walked around the valley that was free of threats and mist. Indeed, he collected some good stuff that made Han Shuo extremely excited. However, none of them were suitable for Statholm. After Statholm the old monster left, Han Shuo's avatar of death did not merge back together. After thinking for a moment, his avatar of death stayed in the underground of Brettel City and silently digested the divine essence of death he obtained. The divine essence contained a considerable amount of divine energy. For his avatar of death who had just entered the low god realm, it was the most direct tonic. Compared to slowly absorbing the power of faith in the abyss realm, it was much faster to absorb divine energy from the divine essence. Han Shuo estimated that the divine energy contained in a single divine essence was more than the power of faith of all the believers in the abyss realm in 20 years. Moreover, it wouldn't take too long to absorb and digest it. It was no wonder why the 4 demon kings would disregard their agreement with Bichimos and fight over a single divine essence. Divine essence was indeed an extremely precious item, especially for a god. It was the most direct and fastest way to increase one's strength. The divine energy contained in a tiny divine essence was more than the power of faith of the entire abyss realm in 20 years. This was rather terrifying. Han Shuo's avatar of death remained in Brettel City, while his avatar of destruction traveled to Lancelot Empire's Asen City through the transportation matrix in Brettel City. He would be gone for 5 years. With Emily, Phoebe, and Fanny all staying in Asen City, it was time for him to meet Lawrence. If Han Shuo didn't hurry to Asen City, the 3 women would definitely make a big fuss when they found out. However, Han Shuo wouldn't use this avatar of his to get intimate with the 3 women. Although his avatar could transform into another Han Shuo, as it wasn't made of flesh and blood, Han Shuo couldn't overcome the psychological hurdle. Therefore, he only treated his two avatars as his strongest weapons. With that thought in mind, Han Shuo knew that he would have to spend a lot of effort to explain himself to the three women in Asen City. As for Han Shuo's avatar, he returned to the Cemetery of Death using the transportation matrix beneath the City Lord's mansion. After returning to the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo left a few words with Jasper and the others before hurriedly leaving for the Dark Forest where he buried Dark Dragon Gilbert's remains. After so many years, it was time to reconstruct Gilbert's body. Only his main body that cultivated in demonic attacks could perform this task. The two low-god avatars wouldn't be of any help at all. This time, not only did Han Shuo have the best materials, but he also obtained some divine items from the void. Han Shuo believed that the Dark Dragon Gilbert who reappeared in the world would be even more powerful. Chapter 588. The Dark Forest, the place of extreme fire where the Emperor of Flames had once stayed, Mountain Tanai. After so many years, the rocks in this valley that had been the site of a volcanic eruption were forever the same reddish-brown. In the center of the valley, one couldn't feel the shade of the dark forest, nor could one see any lush and verdant plants. There was only dry and barren red earth and an abnormally high temperature. The traces of the great battle from a few years ago were still there. The broken rock walls and torn ravines seemed to indicate that something had happened here. Today, Mountain Tanai was no longer peaceful. Rumbling sounds came from the depths of the earth, as if some ancient beast was about to break out of the earth. The ravines grew larger and larger, as if they were being torn apart by invisible hands. The fire elemental energy in the place of extreme fire below seemed to be ignited as the temperature of Mountain Tanai gradually soared. A blurry silhouette swept through the valley at high speed. Rays of dazzling light shot out from his body, shattering the rocks that were as hard as iron and stone and leaving marks on the ground. The silhouette was like an artist drawing a blueprint. As he swept through the valley at high speed, the valley had unknowingly undergone astonishing changes. If someone were to look down from midair, they would discover that the ravines and rocks of Mountain Tanai had shockingly formed a giant picture with a profound meaning, the picture of a soaring dragon. Amidst the lightning, some unknown substances became the materials to fill up the giant picture and fell into the picture of a soaring dragon in the center of the valley. The rumbling of the earth continued. After a series of steps, the blurry silhouette shuttling through the valley finally stepped heavily on a boulder in the center of the valley. Rumble. A rumbling sound like the eruption of a mountain torrent resounded throughout the valley. Accompanied by a deafening roar, a white dragon skeleton slowly emerged from the ravine that had been torn apart in the valley. The dragon's head, body, and tail were all reflected in the soaring dragon diagram that had existed for a long time. As the giant dragon skeleton floated up, an even louder rumbling sound came from the depths of the earth. The place of extreme fire that could nurture treasures of the fire attribute and had existed for an unknown number of years suddenly boiled. Scalding lava overflowed and soaked the giant dragon skeleton in it. All of a sudden, the figure standing proudly in the air above the valley dropped all kinds of materials into the lava. Among them were colorful bright stones, thick liquid with a pungent smell, and rays of light that contained strange energy. The bubbling magma in the place of extreme fire was extremely hot. It melted the various materials and the giant dragon together. The giant dragon skeleton in the middle of the valley actually shone with a dazzling luster, as if the bones of different thicknesses were as hard as diamonds. Buckets of fresh blood poured down from the hands of the figure, standing proudly in midair. As soon as the pungent blood landed on the dragon skeleton, it immediately sizzled and gave off thick smoke. A bizarre change suddenly occurred at this moment. As the buckets of fresh blood poured down, Tanai's dragon skeleton underwent an incredible change. Bloodlines that seemed to be alive entrenched on the dragon skeleton, wriggling as if the blood vessels were reconnected. After an unknown number of buckets of fresh blood poured down, the figure suddenly flew above the dragon's head and forcibly punched a misty ball of strange air into the dragon's brain. In an instant, The originally lifeless skeleton's body that was as hard as a diamond was suddenly wrapped in a blood-red light. Then, it began to move bit by bit. After a while, the gradually moving dragon skeleton stopped wriggling. The wriggling bloodlines also stopped growing. A huge blood cocoon completely wrapped the dragon skeleton, as if waiting for nirvana rebirth. Only at this moment did the busy figure let out a long sigh of relief. Threads of blood shot out from his fingers and landed on the blood cocoon. As soon as the blood fell, it was like a drop of water falling into the sea, without a single ripple. As for the dragon skeleton wrapped in the blood cocoon, the aura of life became stronger and stronger. Then, it sank into the depths of the earth bit by bit and quietly lay dormant. After all the steps were completed, Han Shuo did not relax. He calmly watched the transformation of Tanai Gilbert's body. His consciousness secretly moved, trying to communicate with Gilbert's soul through the connection between the two. "Gilbert, have you woken up?" Han Shuo transmitted. His consciousness firmly locked onto the soul in the middle of the skeleton. After a long time, a weak response came from the soul. It was a little tentative and a little surprised. "Master, is that you?" Han Shuo grinned. As soon as he sensed the response from Gilbert's soul, he could not help but heave a genuine sigh of relief. As long as there was a response from the soul, it meant that everything was under Han Shuo's control. It proved that Gilbert's soul had established a connection with that incomplete body. Once this was confirmed, the following matters would be much easier. "It's me. Fortunately, my efforts were not in vain. It seems that there are no problems on the whole." Han Shuo's heart was gratified. However, his consciousness did not relax at all. "Waha! I'm alive. I'm alive again. That's great." The message was still weak, but Gilbert's excitement was transmitted very clearly. "Master, what should I do next? Make the most of your time." During this period of time, you need to quickly familiarize yourself with your soul and your new body's senses, and tacit understanding. Before the blood cocoon is torn, you need to understand the power contained in each of your bones according to the memories I left for you. Most importantly, you have to use all your wisdom to try to dissipate the divine power of the divine crystal of darkness left in your bones. If you can do this, your body will contain the divine power of darkness. Although it is only a little, as long as you carefully comprehend it, you will understand the existence of that divine power and how to obtain it. This will lay a solid foundation for you to become the god of darkness. Han Shuo commanded calmly. "Master, I understand. For the sake of becoming stronger, I, Gilbert, will definitely make good use of this opportunity." "Very good. I've forcefully inserted that small piece of the divine crystal of darkness into your body. This is an ingenious method that I've come up with after studying it for a long time. I hope you won't let me down. As long as you can grasp this opportunity and comprehend the existence of divine power and how to use it, you will not be far from becoming a god." Han Shuo encouraged. "I'll try it immediately." Gilbert clearly understood that this was an extremely rare opportunity. After Han Shuo finished speaking, Gilbert took the initiative to cut off any further communication with Han Shuo. As his body slowly sank into the depths of the earth, he focused all his energy on his new body. Seeing Gilbert working so hard, Han Shuo was very gratified. He also understood that Gilbert truly understood the importance of strength. In the past, in order to save his grandfather and the Dark Dragon race, Gilbert and Han Shuo had rushed all the way to this place. They thirsted for the power of fire in the place of extreme fire. However, Gilbert's strength back then wasn't enough. He could only burn his life force as the price to forcibly raise his speed to the limit that his body couldn't bear. In the end, he died in the Valley of Fire. In these few years, Gilbert, who only had his soul left, had truly tasted the pain of loneliness and helplessness. Within the soul ring that was eternally without light, he had continuously tempered his soul using the method taught by Han Shuo. With tenacious willpower, he had cultivated his soul to the point where it could possess a body. It was precisely because of this that he understood what strength meant to him. He abandoned his impetuous and superficial temperament and began to pursue the path of strength with indomitable will. This was the most crucial moment for Gilbert. Han Shuo didn't dare to leave Gilbert's side. His main body found a boulder in the distance and sat cross-legged on it with a cold and detached expression. While regulating his breathing and recovering the demonic yuan he had consumed, he silently guarded Gilbert. On the other side, Han Shuo's avatar of destruction had used the transportation matrix in Brett L City to descend into Lancelot Empire's Asen City. In the past 5 years, the scenery of Asen City hadn't changed much. The only thing that had changed was the people coming and going. Whether it was the poor or the soldiers, they seemed to have lost much of their former relaxed and contented manner. Their faces were heavy and solemn. Lancelot Empire's situation wasn't good. The ferocious Orc Empire was recklessly attacking the southern border while Kasi Empire, supported by the Shrine of Ice, was constantly pressuring the Empire in the west. There had been many big and small battles in the past few years. All the citizens of Lancelot Empire had come to realize the cruelty of war. In addition, Lancelot Empire hadn't been on the winning side for the past few years. Naturally, the citizens were even more terrified. In the past 5 years, Han Shuo's 3 women had become the most eye-catching women in Lancelot Empire due to their extraordinary backgrounds and the fact that they stood on the right side in the Palace War. Emily, the leader of the Dark Mantle's upper echelon, controlled the dark forces of Lancelot Empire and was the youngest dark sacred magus in Lancelot Empire. Phoebe, similarly, was the youngest sacred swordmaster and the owner of the Buzzed Merchant Guild in Lancelot Empire. She held the most wealth in the empire. Fanny, the director of the Necromancy Major of Babylon Academy, was also a Necromancy Grand Magus and had a terrifying father behind her. The 3 women had always been dazzling on the stage of Lancelot Empire. In the past 5 years, because Han Shuo hadn't appeared for a long time, countless young and talented men had pursued them. Those people clearly knew that they were Han Shuo's women, but they didn't mind at all. They used Han Shuo's death as an excuse to pester the 3 women with all kinds of power. All of this was because of the 3 women's current strength and status, as well as their unusually friendly relationship with Lancelot Empire's King Lawrence. Sigh, it's a problem with my girlfriend's work. I can't help it, but I have to take care of it. There's no helping it. In life, there are always some things that don't go your way. Also, since I've talked it over with my brothers, I should inform them in advance that the Chidian Authors Gathering will be held on the 11th to the 14th of this month. The location is in Gillen. I'll probably be quite busy these few days and will probably only be able to update at night. Little and I might not be able to release 2 chapters a day as usual again. I'm very ashamed, so I'm informing you in advance. However, Little and I will definitely make up for it after she's done with her work. This has always been my attitude. I'll remember the chapters that I owe and will slowly make up for it in the second half of the month. Including today, I already owe 2 chapters this month. I'll remember every chapter that I owe in the future and make up for it afterwards. I'll apologize again. I don't have the face to ask for monthly votes for the time being. Please forgive me. Little and I rarely asks for leave so frequently. It's indeed because things happen to gather together. I'm very helpless and embarrassed. Everyone, please forgive me. Chapter 589. Lancelot Empire, within the Buzzed Merchant Guild. Elegant pavilions were situated in the area of the rockery overgrown with vines. There was a small bridge over flowing water, and the fragrance of flowers and plants filled the air. It was a beautiful and lush scenery. On the swing, Phoebe was dressed in a plain white robe. Her beautiful face was filled with worry. 5 years had passed, but time had not left any traces on her face. On the contrary, she seemed to have become more and more beautiful, more and more tasteful. Every time she finished her tedious work, she would habitually stare blankly at the crevice of the rockery. Her thoughts would unconsciously wander back to a few years ago. In that narrow crevice of the rockery, there had once been 2 people leaning against each other. They could smell each other's scent and feel each other's heartbeats. Many years had passed, but the memory was still as clear as day, as if it had happened yesterday. "Miss, are you thinking of him again?" The sound of footsteps rapidly approached. Fabian looked at the dazed Phoebe and sighed in his heart. He called out softly, "Oh, you're here." Waking up from her thoughts, Phoebe smiled apologetically at Fabian. She waved her hand and pointed at the chair beside her, saying, "Sit first." Fabian did not stand on ceremony and sat down at Phoebe's gesture. Looking at the tired Phoebe, Fabian was a little worried. He hesitated for a moment and carefully said, "That first prince of the Angela Empire has come again." Phoebe, who was still gazing at the fake mountain in front of her in a daze, was somewhat irritated when she heard this. Her brows furrowed as she said impatiently, "This person is too annoying. How many times have I told him? Why does he still come?" Fabian smiled bitterly. He thought to himself, "You know best why he came back." After hesitating for a moment, Fabian had no choice but to explain. Before coming here, Prince Hagrid had just left the palace. He even went to pay a visit to Lord Carell. Phoebe's face turned cold. She lightly snorted and said, "No one can change my decision, including those two." Fabian's smile became even more bitter, but there was a bit of admiration in his heart. He looked deeply at Phoebe and said, "But Lord Brian hasn't appeared for 5 years. There are rumors outside." Fabian didn't continue speaking until here. "Are you saying that Brian is dead?" Phoebe sneered and said disdainfully, "How could Brian be dead? He's just cultivating. Don't listen to those people's nonsense." But it was the Church of Light who released the news, and the Pope of Light himself has confirmed it. Although unwilling, Fabian still spoke the truth. So what? The Holy Father of Light wouldn't lie? Phoebe, who had successfully cultivated to the realm of Sword Saint, had improved a lot over the years. However, whenever someone brought up this topic with her, she would always become a little abnormal. The sound of messy footsteps came from outside. Not long after, a group of people arrived. The person in the lead was around 30 years old. His appearance was extraordinary, and he was mature and steady. There was an oppressive air of nobility about him, and it was obvious that he had been in a high position for a long time. Behind him were 2 grand magi, a great swordmaster, 3 archmages, and 2 earth knights. They were all dressed in luxurious clothes and looked at this man with complicated expressions. However, when Phoebe saw this person, her eyes revealed obvious annoyance. She said coldly, "Prince Hagrid, why have you come again? We're about to return to our country. I've specially come this time to discuss some of the details of the business between our 2 countries. I really can't be at ease if these things aren't handled well." Hagrid looked at Phoebe and didn't conceal the burning passion in his eyes. "Let's talk when we meet His Majesty tomorrow. I don't really like people disturbing my peace." How could Phoebe not know what he was thinking? She said impatiently. Phoebe jumped off the swing, and a sharp sword aura was naturally released. The people behind Hagrid could clearly feel the aura from Phoebe's body. They unnaturally spread out and protected their master in the center. Hagrid stared at Phoebe's back with a face full of infatuation. He only coughed lightly when Phoebe was about to disappear from his sight and said hastily, "I've already discussed some of the details with His Majesty. We only need Miss Phoebe to confirm them." After speaking, Hagrid didn't care whether Phoebe was listening or not, hurriedly blurting out a few questions in rapid succession. Phoebe, who was about to leave, couldn't help but be startled when she heard Hagrid's urgent words. She froze on the spot and looked Hagrid up and down oddly. She said, "Have you gone mad?" Not only Phoebe, but even Fabian and the guards by Hagrid's side were a bit incredulous. "Your Highness, are you sure you're not mistaken? That port only charges 10% of the Buzzed Merchant Guild's tariff. How can it be so low?" "Your Highness, if we're so lenient with the Buzzed Merchant Guild, the other merchant guilds will definitely not agree. We won't be able to explain ourselves," a swordsman said hastily. Fabian, the old merchant of the Buzzed Merchant Guild, couldn't hide the excitement in his heart. He said hastily, "That's great. His Highness Hagrid is truly a good friend." Sighing in her heart, Phoebe looked at Hagrid, whose eyes were burning with passion. She hadn't thought that this person would even use the interests of his own country to curry favor with her. Although Hagrid was the prince of the Angel Empire, if this agreement was carried out, the king of the Angel Empire would still be enraged. Phoebe was a bit touched that he would go to such lengths for her. But even though she was touched, Phoebe still didn't give Hagrid any face. Contrary to Fabian's expectations, she straightforwardly refused. Forget it. Our buzzed merchant guild doesn't want to take advantage of you. We'll calculate it according to your tariff with the other merchant guilds. Miss. Fabian was shocked and hurriedly tried to persuade Phoebe to change her mind. There's no need to say more. Our buzzed merchant guild will do everything according to the rules. Before Fabian could finish his persuasion, Phoebe looked at Hagrid tiredly. She sighed and said, Your Highness, it's better if you don't waste time. I definitely won't do as you wish. There have been many battles recently. I hope you'll return to the city safely. Take care. Hagrid's face became dejected when he heard this. He smiled bitterly and said, Why? Why are you treating me like this? That person has been dead for 5 years, and the incident has also happened for 5 years. Why can't you forget him? What's so good about him? Can a mere city lord compare to me? The Angel Empire will be mine in the future. I can give you everything he can, and more. Why? This has nothing to do with benefits. Phoebe looked at Hagrid with some pity. She paused and said coldly, You won't understand. I understand. Why don't I understand? Hagrid lost his composure. He stared at Phoebe and started yelling. His voice gradually became louder. Even if you love him, he's already dead. It's been 5 years. You should have walked out of his influence, right? Even if you haven't, I can wait for you. 1 year, 10 years. I'm willing to wait for you. I'll wait for you to acknowledge me. I'm sorry. If you really want to wait, then wait until you die. Phoebe knew that this person couldn't be saved. Although she was a little touched, she still firmly expressed her stance. I'm not satisfied. I'm not satisfied. Are you going to be lonely for the rest of your life because of a dead person? After pursuing him for so long, Hagrid was about to return to the Angel Empire. But all he got from Phoebe was deep despair. This made it hard for him to suppress the resentment in his heart. He lost his composure. This has nothing to do with you. Phoebe's face gradually turned cold. She was a little impatient. She waved her hand and said to Fabian beside her, Send His Highness back. Fabian bowed and pointed in the direction of the door in accordance with etiquette. He said coldly, Your Highness, Sir Mages and Sir Swordsmen, please leave. In the depths of his heart, Fabian also didn't want his miss to do anything unfavorable to that person, even if that person seemed to be dead. Looking at Phoebe angrily, Hagrid finally sighed helplessly. He looked at Phoebe's frosty back and said in a low voice, I'll still wait for you. I'll wait until you forget that person. With that, Hagrid waved his hand weakly and prepared to leave with his subordinates. At this moment, there were hurried footsteps. After a while, the thief Chester's black robe fell into everyone's eyes. After Chester came over, he first bowed to Phoebe, then said respectfully, Miss Phoebe, Lady Emily has a letter for you. Give it to me. Phoebe reached out and asked for it. She muttered softly, Emily is too much. She hasn't come to see me for almost half a month. I don't know what she's been busy with. What a heartless fellow. Tearing the envelope, Phoebe took a glance. Her delicate body immediately trembled and her fair cheeks flushed with excitement. 60% surprise, 30% eagerness, and a little shyness appeared on her face. At this moment, Phoebe radiated with beauty, giving off a gorgeous sense of beauty. Hagrid was dumbfounded. His heart was filled with questions. After pestering Phoebe for so long, Hagrid had never seen such an expression on her face. His heart was filled with astonishment for a moment. He didn't understand what was wrong with Phoebe. Fabian was very close to Phoebe. He turned his head curiously to take a look and discovered that there were only 4 beautiful words on the letter in Phoebe's hand. He's back. Chapter 590. Fabian was a bit puzzled at first, but was shocked after a while. He seemed to remember something, and his face was full of pleasant surprise. Where's Emily? Phoebe's voice trembled as she stared at Chester and asked anxiously. Anyone could see the excitement in her heart. The Lord has just returned from outside. He should be handing over some matters at headquarters right now. Chester answered respectfully. Hagrid, this is how it is. Please return. I have some matters to attend to, and will be taking my leave first. Phoebe nodded and quickly said this to Hagrid. She didn't look at Hagrid and the others again after speaking and hurriedly left, as if unwilling to stay even a moment longer. She called out as soon as she walked out, "Men, prepare the horse." The hurried Phoebe left immediately after receiving the letter from Emily, leaving the group of people looking at each other in dismay. Hagrid's expression was desolate, his eyes filled with surprise and confusion. He stared blankly at Phoebe's receding figure, not knowing what to do. "Farewell." Chester, who had delivered the letter, smiled faintly at Fabian, bowed to Hagrid, and silently retreated. Fabian was still drowning in uncontrollable surprise after Phoebe and Chester had left. The smile on his lips was so obvious, and the look in his eyes was so excited. "Mr. Fabian, what's going on?" It was obvious that Hagrid had also seen some clues from Fabian's face. He had too many questions in his heart and couldn't help but ask. Taking in a deep breath and calming his excited emotions, Fabian looked at Hagrid with some pity and smiled. "If I'm not wrong, the Lord Brian that our young miss has been waiting for should have returned." "Impossible. Didn't that fellow die a long time ago?" Hagrid's expression changed, and he said with some despair, "The message sent by the Pope of the Church of Light can't be wrong." Fabian smiled and said with some pride, "Lord Brian is blessed with a long life. The Church of Light's despicable methods must not have succeeded." Hagrid's face was ashen. He knew that he no longer had any hope in pursuing Phoebe. Before he appeared, Phoebe had already rejected him so firmly. Now, what hope did he have? At the Dark Mantle headquarters, Han Shuo found Candide, one of the three heavyweights, amidst the admiring and amazed gazes of the crowd. Han Shuo's sudden appearance shocked everyone who knew of this news. Along the way, every member of the Dark Mantle who knew Han Shuo's identity expressed surprise and respect with their eyes. They spread this shocking news to each other. The legend of the Dark Mantle is back. The pride of the Empire is back. The powerful Guardian has returned. In just an instant, all the members who received this news were filled with anticipation and felt sincerely proud of themselves. 5 years ago, Han Shuo was the most eye-catching expert of the Lancelot Empire. He looked at Candide smilingly and said sincerely, "Isn't it all because of you? If it wasn't for the letter you gave me, how could I have comprehended the true essence of the elemental energy of darkness so quickly and entered this new realm in just a few years?" Candide smiled at Han Shuo, calmly admitting that all of this was because of Han Shuo's help. "It's also the result of your own hard work." Han Shuo didn't claim credit for himself. He grinned and said, "However, becoming a sacred magus of darkness is only at the threshold of power. There's still a long way to go." Candide's smile disappeared. He sized up Han Shuo and said solemnly, "Why don't you have the aura of a necromancer? Instead, you have a very strong aura of slaughter. What happened back then?" "It's nothing. The Church of Light shamelessly schemed against me. Hee, they thought I was long dead. It's just that I'm blessed with a great life. Not only did I not die, but I also had other fortuitous encounters." Han Shuo laughed heartily, but his eyes were filled with killing intent. "What realm are you at now?" Candide asked solemnly after staring at Han Shuo for a while. Shrugging his shoulders, Han Shuo said in a relaxed manner, "When I'm free, I'll wipe out the Church of Light. Then you will know what realm I'm at." These words were incomparably arrogant, but coming from Han Shuo's mouth, that kind of confidence made Candide flabbergasted. After staring blankly for a long while, Candide finally forced a smile and shook his head. He advised, "If you dare to say so, I know that your strength must have skyrocketed. It's just that the Church of Light is the #1 religious organization on Profound Continent. No matter how strong you are, it's impossible for you to do it alone. Let's do it step by step in the future." Han Shuo smiled and did not reply. His face was filled with indifference, as though destroying the #1 religious organization on Profound Continent was just a trivial matter. The two chatted for a while more before Han Shuo smilingly said, "Emily has returned. You two continue chatting." Candide thought for a moment when he saw Han Shuo stand up and said, "After you finish talking with Emily, it's best that you meet His Majesty. I believe he will be very pleased." "Got it," Han Shuo said in a carefree smile. He stood up and was about to leave. "Hold on." Before Han Shuo left, Candide suddenly spoke. Under Han Shuo's attentive gaze, Candide hesitated for a moment and said in a somewhat awkward manner, Although you have been away for 5 years, Bretel City has become more and more powerful. The 7 Grand Duchies can be considered as Bretel City's territory. Jack, Dorcas, and the others are all your subordinates and only listen to your orders. It seems that Bretel City has become another country. His Majesty is His Majesty after all. The Empire hasn't been doing too well these past few years. He has always taken the attitude of letting your subordinates manage Bretel City. Han Shuo waved his hand to stop Candide from continuing. Looking deeply at Candide, Han Shuo put on a faint smile and said, "Say no more, I know what I'm doing." Candide was relieved. He nodded and said, "That's good. His Majesty the King wouldn't be too relieved when you weren't around. But now that you are back, he shouldn't be worried anymore. These past few years, His Majesty has been believing in Astrologer Grace's words more and more. He said frankly that without you, the Empire really isn't doing too well." Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment. After thinking for a moment, he really felt some admiration for that dead Astrologer Grace. That woman's prophecy before her death was surprisingly accurate. By now, Han Shuo had long understood that the astrology that Astrologer Grace practiced was actually the most mysterious of the 4 edictal forces, the Edict of Destiny. However, it was obvious that Grace hadn't delved too deeply into it. She could only predict some destinies, and didn't even know how to use the most basic Edict of Destiny. The 4 edictal forces of destruction, life, space-time, and destiny. The number of people who practiced the edictal forces of destruction and life was already somewhat scarce. As for the edictal forces of space-time and destiny, the number of people who practiced them was even rarer. The reason for this was that these 2 edictal forces were really too mysterious. Without guidance, one might not even be able to find the way to practice them. "All right, Emily has arrived. I'm leaving." Thinking in his heart, Han Shuo left in a carefree manner and walked towards Emily's room. Chapter 591. You still know to come back? Emily threw herself into Han Shuo's arms and used all her strength to hug Han Shuo tightly as she said emotionally. After being nourished by the rebirth pill and Han Shuo, Emily's skin was fair and tender, as if she had become younger and younger. Emily, who was already a sacred magus of the dark element, naturally had a mysterious and charming temperament. Her fiery eyes gazed at Han Shuo, releasing a soul-stirring beauty. Han Shuo gently patted Emily's shoulder and was also deeply moved. His face was full of pity as he gently comforted Emily, who couldn't help herself. "Where have you been these years? The Church of Light said you were dead. We were worried for a long time and didn't know whether you were dead or alive." In front of outsiders, Emily, Phoebe, and the other 2 girls had always scoffed at the Church of Light's statement. However, they had always been worried in their hearts. Today, facing Han Shuo, they finally couldn't pretend to be strong and showed their weak side. "Don't cry, don't cry." Han Shuo hugged Emily and gently comforted Emily, who was showing her true weakness. His heart was full of guilt. Just as Han Shuo was comforting Emily in a soft voice, hurried footsteps could be heard. The newcomer didn't seem to want to delay even a moment. Their footsteps were incomparably disorderly. 2 pretty faces with teardrops on their cheeks fell into Han Shuo's eyes almost at the same time. Phoebe and Fanny walked over while holding hands. When their eyes saw Han Shuo standing there proudly, their eyes couldn't move away from Han Shuo. The moment their eyes met, the 2 girls flew towards Han Shuo and threw themselves into Han Shuo's arms. Fanny tightly hugged one of Han Shuo's arms and sobbed softly. Phoebe punched Han Shuo's chest, seemingly using this method to relieve the excitement of suddenly seeing Han Shuo. Just like Emily, Phoebe and Fanny had become more and more beautiful. Due to their great increase in strength, Their bodies naturally had an awe-inspiring temperament that people didn't dare to look at directly. The three girls who were the center of attention in Lancelot Empire couldn't control themselves at this moment. They cried in front of Han Shuo, expressing the agitation in their hearts in their unique way. Han Shuo felt somewhat sour in his heart. Looking at the three girls who were now his own, bits and pieces of the past clearly surfaced in his mind, making him indescribably emotional. All right, aren't I back? Han Shuo's two hands moved at the same time, frantically wiping away the tears on the three girls' faces. With a sad smile, he said, "If those talented youths of Lancelot Empire knew that the three of you, who were as awe-inspiring and inviolable as goddesses, had such a weak appearance, I wonder what they would think." After fiercely punching Han Shuo, Phoebe resentfully glared at Han Shuo and angrily said, "What have you been doing for the past 5 years? How come there wasn't even the slightest bit of news? Do you know how worried we were about you?" Nodding his head with a bitter smile, Han Shuo reached out his hand and straightened the messy hair on Phoebe's forehead. He helplessly said, "I also had no choice. I don't know how many planes of existence we are separated by. Even if I wanted to send you a message, I wouldn't be able to." When these words were spoken, the shock of the three girls surpassed their sadness. Their bright eyes abruptly shot out a bright radiance as they cried out in surprise, "What? 5 years ago, because I was schemed against, I fell to another plane of existence. In the other plane of existence, I experienced some things. After going through untold hardships, I finally found a way to return." Looking at the three girls, Han Shuo slowly explained, "What happened?" Even the experienced and knowledgeable Emily was shocked to the extreme by Han Shuo's words. Her black eyebrows slightly trembled as she anxiously asked, "It's a long story." Looking at the three women who'd had intimate relations with him, Han Shuo slowly narrated the course of events to the three women in simple terms. Although Han Shuo wasn't a brilliant speaker, because his experiences were too thrilling and exciting, in addition to the fact that the three girls cared about him very much, when he said these words, the three girls were pleasantly surprised. Rich expressions constantly emerged on their faces. "The Church of Light is really too shameless and despicable." Phoebe was enraged. She clenched her teeth and fiercely said, "We want revenge." "Don't worry, they won't be jumping around for much longer." When Han Shuo recalled the past, he found it hard to suppress the indignation in his heart. In a cold voice, he said, "Not only the Church of Light, but the primordious dragon will also have to pay the price for what he has done." "Brian, you said that you have become a god?" Emily, on the other hand, was stunned by Han Shuo's last words. She looked at Han Shuo with trembling eyes. Han Shuo put on a carefree smile and proudly said, "That's right. Although Profound Continent is vast, I believe that there aren't many people who can stop me." Han Shuo was being modest. Given his current strength, he could do whatever he wanted on Profound Continent. The Church of Light and the Shrine of Ice were nothing in his eyes. Based on his understanding of Profound Continent, the primordious dragon he once met in the depths of the Dark Forest should be the most powerful being on Profound Continent. However, even the primordious dragon was merely a low god cultivating in the elemental energy of Earth. Han Shuo, with his 3 souls and 2 low god avatars, could easily defeat him. Although Profound Continent was vast, it would be hard to find an expert who could contend with him head-on. Become a god? What kind of realm is this? Phoebe had also awoken from her rage and looked at Han Shuo in disbelief as she murmured, This is too unbelievable." Fanny, who was tightly hugging Han Shuo's arm, had intense amazement in her beautiful eyes. She simply didn't know what to say when she looked at Han Shuo. The reactions of the 3 ladies were within Han Shuo's expectations. With one thought, he unfolded the domain of divinity. In an instant, the surrounding space was distorted by the edict of destruction. All elemental energies vanished without a trace. What's going on? What's going on? Oh my God, my energy. I don't have any energy left. Before the 3 ladies could react, panicked shouts were heard from outside. The faces of those Dark Mantle members were filled with fear. They couldn't help but shout and yell. It was a very lively scene. For any successful cultivator, once the power they relied on for survival disappeared without a trace, that kind of fear was very difficult to adapt to. Even the demons of the Abyss realm who were used to it would tremble in fear whenever they were in the domain of divinity of the 4 demon kings, let alone these people who were experiencing such a situation for the first time. This is a characteristic of the domain of divinity. Those who have yet to reach the divine realm, no matter what realm they were at, will face death when facing a god. Han Shuo explained with a smile when he saw that the 3 ladies were equally uneasy. This is too terrifying. The faces of the 3 ladies were aghast. Within the domain of divinity, they, who were high and mighty in the Lancelot Empire, suddenly felt as though they were helpless lambs waiting to be slaughtered. They felt a sense of powerlessness and frustration. With a faint smile, Han Shuo withdrew the domain of divinity, and the space elemental energy returned to normal. In an instant, the 3 ladies felt the return of their energy and couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. Their restless minds calmed down. The clamoring Dark Mantle members outside were even more astonished. They were still discussing spiritedly. Some said that what happened just now was just an illusion. However, most of them understood that it wasn't an illusion. They were all talking at once but couldn't find an answer. The 3 ladies looked at Han Shuo with eyes full of worship. Even the 3 of them were awed by this fact. With a faint smile, Han Shuo took out a green crystal from his space ring. He held Fanny's hand and handed it over. In a deep voice he said, "This crystal contains a very strong element of death. I will teach you a method. Take some time to absorb the element of death in the crystal into your body. This will greatly increase your strength and allow you to cultivate a body of element." This was an elemental crystal of death that Han Shuo had obtained from the body of a base god in the netherworld. That person's soul had been forcibly occupied by Han Shuo and cultivated into an avatar of death. It turned out that the essence of the base god's crystal had condensed together to form this elemental crystal of death. Back then, Han Shuo had given Phoebe the divine weapon, Starry Sky, and Emily the origin crystal to cultivate the element of darkness. After 5 years, both Emily and Phoebe had become sacred rank experts. Among them, Emily had repeatedly obtained treasures from Han Shuo. Her speed of improvement was even more astounding. Based on Han Shuo's observation, she was about to break through to the demigod realm. Only Fanny, because she cultivated in the element of death, didn't receive any treasures from Han Shuo because Han Shuo had given all the good stuff to the little skull to absorb. Therefore, she was only a necromancy grand magus. For me? Fanny was overjoyed. Her hands trembled as she held the green crystal. She could feel the powerful element of death contained within it. She was so happy that she didn't know what to say. Every practitioner wanted to improve. All these years, Fanny had always felt inferior. She couldn't catch up to Phoebe and Emily no matter how hard she tried. This made her feel helpless and frustrated. She was also a woman. She was also Han Shuo's woman. She didn't want to be inferior to others. However, her aptitude was limited and she didn't have a good master to guide her. Because she cultivated in the element of death and didn't obtain many benefits from Han Shuo, her improvement was not obvious. "Of course it's for you," Han Shuo affirmed. He stretched out his hand and gently pressed on Fanny's back. He opened his mouth and whispered into Fanny's ear, "Listen with your heart and feel with your heart. This is a method of cultivating the body in the Abyss realm. Try to master it. Once you absorb the element of death in that crystal, you can form a body of element." Chapter 592. When a person suddenly obtained something he had been looking forward to for a long time, it was very difficult for him to calm down. Fanny was no exception. On one hand, it was Han Shuo's return, and on the other hand, it was the joy of the great advancement in her strength. This made it impossible for Fanny to calm down. After trying for a while, Han Shuo discovered that Fanny's soul was in a state of excitement all along. No matter how hard he tried, she couldn't sense what he was doing. He had no choice but to give up. Seeing that Fanny was rather anxious, Han Shua said in a gentle voice, "Forget it, forget it. There's no rush. All right, forget it for today. That scoundrel is back anyway. We'll have plenty of time in the future." Phoebe smiled and consoled Fanny. With a thought, Han Shua tried to observe Phoebe and Emily. He discovered that the two women were sincerely happy for Fanny. There wasn't the slightest trace of jealousy or dissatisfaction that Han Shua had imagined. Back when he left Profound Continent, Han Shua discovered that there was still some estrangement between the three ladies. He had even thought of a way to appease the other two ladies. He didn't expect that the three ladies would actually get along so well. This was somewhat out of Han Shua's expectation. Emily's eyes roamed around Han Shua's face. As though she understood what Han Shua was thinking, she giggled and said, "Do you think that we would be jealous?" "Somewhat. I didn't expect that the two of you had become so close." Han Shua didn't try to conceal it and put on a puzzled expression. "You've been gone for 5 years. During such a long time, the three of us could only sense your existence through our mutual acquaintance when we were together. During these 5 years, the three of us would meet each other almost every few days. None of us are the kind of narrow-minded women. We've come to terms with everything. Some of the original barriers have already disappeared without a trace." Emily giggled as she explained to Han Shua. Phoebe also rolled her eyes at Han Shua, as if she wanted to prove the closeness between her and Fanny. She grabbed Fanny's jade arm and glared at Han Shua. "Our relationship is even closer than with you now." Han Shua was stunned. He exclaimed in surprise, "More intimate than me? You won't do that kind of thing while I'm not here, will you?" The three women blushed at the same time and said in unison, "Of course not. Bastard, what are you thinking?" Phoebe fiercely pinched Han Shua. She blushed and said angrily, "We won't be as lascivious as you. On the other hand, that new dark elf of yours had the intention, but we firmly rejected her." "Adele?" Han Shua was startled and said angrily, "You didn't let her have her way, did you?" "Who's Adele?" Phoebe asked doubtfully. "She's the dark elf you mentioned. Her original name is Adele." Han Shua quickly explained and hurriedly asked, "That woman isn't anything good." "Damn it, you're my women. Although she's also a woman, but my women can't be touched by other women." Emily frowned and said solemnly, "No, her origins are unknown. Although she considers herself to be your woman, we've always been on guard against her." After a pause, Emily slowly said, "This woman is too scheming, even to her own people. We don't like her, so we're just feigning civility with her." "You're quite accurate." Han Shua breathed a sigh of relief and explained, "This woman has her own goals in coming to Bredel City. Humph, running amok in my territory. I'll kill her as soon as I return." "You killed her? How could you bear to kill such a beautiful woman?" Phoebe looked at Han Shua strangely and asked doubtfully, "You didn't rape her first and then kill her, did you?" Han Shua was speechless. Han Shua angrily looked at Phoebe. He discovered that Phoebe was becoming smarter and smarter. She'd actually seen through his actions in an instant. In order to cover it up, Han Shua pretended to be distressed and said, Phoebe, why are your thoughts so dirty? Why didn't you say I killed her first and then raped her? She's been painstakingly plotting to kill me. I naturally can't give her any chance." "Brian, what's going on?" When Fanny heard that Adele had been scheming to kill her man, she didn't have the slightest bit of sympathy for her. Instead, she became somewhat resentful. Han Shua naturally wouldn't tell her about how he'd raped and killed Adele all those years ago. He casually labeled Adele as a sinister and ruthless snake or scorpion, dodging the matter. All right. Let's not talk about this anymore. I'll make a trip to the palace first and talk to Lawrence about this matter. I'll look for you when I come out." Business was more important. Even if it wasn't for Lancelot Empire, Han Shua still wanted to help Lawrence for the sake of those he cared about. Up until now, Han Shua increasingly felt that Grace's prophecy was incomparably accurate. It was precisely because of his appearance that Lawrence was able to ascend to the throne and conquer the 7 Grand Duchies. And because of his departure, Lancelot Empire had fallen into a predicament. Now that he'd returned, Lancelot Empire was about to usher in its new glory. All sorts of signs indicated that as long as he was in Lancelot Empire would prosper. It was exactly the same as what Grace had said back then. The Edict of Fate was indeed a miraculous power. Han Shuo sighed with emotion in his heart. It wasn't easy for you to come back. We sisters have been waiting for you for a long time. Can't you spend more time with us? Emily complained. When she said this, Fanny and Phoebe also had resentful looks in their eyes. We'll have plenty of time in the future, Han Shuo explained smilingly. Soon after, his heart jolted as he understood something from Emily's resentment. He shook his head with a bitter smile and said, I've just said that this isn't my original body. That matter isn't very convenient. With Han Shuo's reminder, the three ladies suddenly came to their senses. They also heard the implied meaning in Han Shuo's words and knew that he had guessed their inner shyness. The three ladies looked at each other and blushed at the same time. They laughed and scolded, Go, go. Don't worry. When my original body returns, I'll definitely feed you all. Then, we'll have a taste of sleeping together. Han Shuo laughed proudly. His body flashed and he disappeared from the three ladies' eyes. That scoundrel. He's not serious at all, Phoebe said angrily with a flushed face. After a while, when she saw that the two ladies weren't saying anything, she couldn't help but look at Fanny and Emily in puzzlement. She saw that the two ladies were blushing and their eyes were overflowing with amorous feelings. Their bodies were delicate and weak, as though they were thinking of something wonderful. You two little hussies, look at yourselves in the mirror. If those admirers saw you, they would definitely have a heart attack. With just a glance, Phoebe knew what the two ladies were thinking and scolded them with a smile. Aren't you the same? Look at yourself in the mirror before talking about us. How are you any better than us? Fanny chuckled and scolded back. The room was brimming with joyful and happy giggles. 5 years of bitterness vanished at this moment, and the room was filled with contented joy. Lord Brian, you're really a role model for our generation. You've actually subdued the 3 goddesses of the Empire. Nonsense, Lord Brian is the legend of our dark mantle, the pride of the Empire. Only a person like him has the means to make the 3 goddesses of the Empire bow their heads and willingly wait for him for 5 years. He's really a god. Those members of the Dark Mantle, who heard the silver bell-like laughter, sighed in admiration. Lancelot Empire's Imperial Palace. Han Shuo easily passed through layers upon layers of defenses and arrived unimpeded at the palace where Lawrence handled official business, without making a single sound. Compared to before, Lawrence was much calmer. Although he looked exhausted, he was still concentrating on examining and approving documents. Judging from his focused appearance, it seemed as though he could continue for a year or two if no one disturbed him. Through Jack, Dorcas, and the others, as well as the enormous dark mantle apparatus, Han Shuo knew that Lawrence was indeed a wise ruler. In the past few years, Lawrence had used all his wisdom on the internal construction of the Empire. The Empire had achieved remarkable results. None of the citizens of the Empire dared to deny Lawrence's contributions to the Lancelot Empire. Even though the Lancelot Empire was currently facing the frenzied suppression of the Empire of Orcs and Kasi Empire, its defense was still impregnable under Lawrence's leadership. Because of this, although the citizens of Lancelot were somewhat fearful, they still had great faith in the power of the Empire. There had not been a single civil strife, and the cohesiveness of the Empire was astonishingly strong. For this to be the case, Lawrence deserved great credit. After silently observing for a while in the dark, Han Shuo could even clearly see a few tufts of white hair at the back of Lawrence's head. He sighed inwardly. Han Shuo knew that Lawrence must have been exhausted by the state's affairs all these years. Lawrence didn't disappoint him. After standing in silence for a long while, Han Shuo softly coughed. "Who is it?" Lawrence asked in a deep voice without raising his head. "Long time no see," Han Shuo replied, walking out from behind with a smile. Lawrence frowned when he heard the voice. He seemed to be a little puzzled by this familiar yet unfamiliar voice. Lawrence frowned and pondered for a while. Then, an irrepressible surprise suddenly burst out from his eyes. He abruptly raised his head and turned around, exclaiming with extreme joy, "Brian, is that you?" "It's me. I'm back," Han Shuo said with a smile. He paused for a moment, then said with a solemn expression, "I'm back to help you conquer the world." Chapter 593. I'm back to help you conquer the world in one fell swoop. With just one sentence, the king of Lancelot Empire, who had been frowning in anxiety for the past few years, was suddenly freed from his deep worries. Lawrence looked at Han Shuo, who hadn't changed much. He didn't know why, but he felt an indescribable sense of trust. It was as though as long as Han Shuo was in Lancelot Empire, he and the country had nothing to worry about. Even Lawrence couldn't understand what was going on with this feeling. Perhaps it was because Han Shuo's actions in the past few years had confirmed astrologer Grace's judgment. Or perhaps it was because Han Shuo had brought him all sorts of surprises before he had even become king. Facing the invasion of two powerful enemies, the Empire of Orcs and Kasi Empire, Lawrence, as the ruler of a nation, had racked his brains to think of ways to reverse this unfavorable situation. Unfortunately, no matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't find a suitable way to deal with these two great troubles. It was at this moment that Han Shuo returned. Pleasant surprise instantly filled Lawrence's face. Lawrence, who had always presented himself as a mature and steady person for the past few years, was so excited that he became somewhat incoherent. "You're back. That's great, that's great. That damned light pope is indeed a despicable villain. Brian, I didn't let you down. I didn't let the Empire down. Apart from external threats, the Empire no longer has any internal worries." Smiling and nodding, Han Shuo's state of mind had become increasingly stable as his strength had advanced by leaps and bounds. With his current realm, he could naturally tell that Lawrence's words were indeed from the bottom of his heart. "There's no need for superfluous words. Before I came to see you, I had already clearly understood your efforts over the years. This time, I have come to help you resolve your current troubles," Han Shuo said in a deep voice. "Good, good, good." Lawrence said good 3 times in a row. He laughed heartily and said, "It's been 5 years since we last met, and you've become even more domineering than before. That's great. With you in Lancelot Empire, I can finally be at ease." With a wave of his hand, a chair from afar steadily flew and landed behind Han Shuo. Han Shuo sat down calmly and looked straight at the agitated Lawrence. He laid back comfortably and lazily said, "The current situation on the continent may seem chaotic and complicated, but in fact, it's nothing more than the struggle between the few major religions. The Church of Light and the Shrine of Ice are the most powerful. Therefore, the Odin Empire and Kasi Empire, which are supported by them, also have the upper hand." Not bad. When facing Han Shuo, Lawrence not only didn't have the arrogance that an emperor should have, but he also deliberately lowered his stance and said angrily, "I didn't believe that a religious organization could be behind a huge state, but now I believe it. The effect of an existence that stands above all other experts to a religion or a nation is simply too immeasurable." After hearing Lawrence's words, Han Shuo put on a faint smile. He understood that Lawrence must have learned something in the past few years. It seemed that the two demigod existences of the Church of Light and the six-horned tribal king of the soul race should have made him deeply understand the importance of the threat an expert could pose to a nation. Be at ease. From today onwards, those experts will no longer pose any threat to us. And our Lancelot Empire, just like how we conquered the 7 Grand Duchies back then, will conquer the entire profound continent in one fell swoop. Han Shuo's words were resolute and decisive, absolutely savage. However, not only did Lawrence not feel that Han Shuo was being presumptuous, he instead felt an indescribable sense of peace and excitement that he was forcibly suppressing. Han Shuo extended a finger and arrogantly said, "1 month. In 1 month, I will help you sweep away all the experts of hostile religions." Even Lawrence, who was extremely confident in Han Shuo, was somewhat stunned. It wasn't that he didn't believe in Han Shuo's might, but that 1 month's time was just too short. and he deeply understood how terrifying the strength behind the enemy was. In just 1 month's time, Han Shuo had declared that he would sweep away all the religious experts on Profound Continent who were enemies of Lancelot Empire. This was just too savage, too arrogant. Lawrence looked at Han Shuo with some uncertainty and probed, "Brian, isn't 1 month a little too short? That alien race behind the Brute Merchant Alliance, that one from the sacred mountain of the Church of Light, that ice, say no more." Han Shuo smilingly interrupted Lawrence's description and said domineeringly, "You only need to prepare to mobilize the entire nation's military forces and clean up the mess for me. In the future, there will only be one empire on Profound Continent, and that is our Lancelot Empire." Upon finishing those words, Han Shuo stood up and said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "If you trust me, then get ready." "Of course I trust you, but—" Lawrence didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He thought to himself, "It's been 5 years since we last met. Han Shuo's appearance hasn't changed much, but why has his character become so insolent and domineering? Very well. Let's split up. I'll be the main attacker and you'll be the support. That will do." Han Shuo immediately made his decision and said with a calm smile, "All right then, I'll take my leave." Starting from the Empire of Orcs at the southern border, our Lancelot Empire's war of conquest officially begins. Like an erratic, ghostly shadow, Han Shuo's figure concealed in the darkness and vanished without a trace. Lawrence stared at Han Shuo with his eyes wide open. He felt as though Han Shuo had suddenly blended into the darkness, leaving no trace behind. South border city of the Empire of Orcs at the southern border of Lancelot Empire. The shadow of war had shrouded South border city. Since the Empire of Orcs launched their first frenzied attack 2 years ago, South Border City had been embroiled in dozens of big and small battles. Compared to the Empire of Orcs in the past, the Orcs in the past 2 years seemed to have all gone mad. Not only had they gone mad, but they had also become unprecedentedly united and stubborn. In the past 2 years, Firenze, known as the Empire's #1 military commander, had led the Empire's most powerful Howling Legion and firmly defended South Border City, never relaxing for a single day. In the beginning, not only was Firenze able to defend South Border City with ease, but he was also able to launch an attack outside the city and achieve victory in 1 or 2 pursuit battles. However, gradually, more and more Orc troops gathered outside South Border City. Like a dense swarm of locusts, they covered the vast plains outside the city and attacked South Border City in a frenzied manner without fear of death. This was the art of tactical command. Even Firenze didn't dare to go out of the city to face the Empire of Orcs who outnumbered them by too much, especially on the plains. Slowly, the Empire of South Border City that was able to defend the city with ease was whittled down bit by bit under the relentless bombardment of the enemy. At the same time, Kasi Empire to the west of the Empire also launched a ferocious attack on the Empire. The Empire's army that had yet to recover from the invasion of the 7 Grand Duchies was mostly devoted to defending Kasi Empire. They were simply unable to provide any reinforcements for South Border City. Without an advantage, no matter how marvelous Firenze's art of command was, he did not have enough troops at his disposal. In the face of the never-ending onslaught of the Empire of Orcs, the South Border City gradually became powerless. In every battle, the South Border City's army would be whittled down. Fortunately, the people of the southern border were valiant. Firenze had a lofty status in the southern border, and His Majesty Lawrence's reputation had spread far and wide. Many able-bodied men voluntarily gave up their original occupations and threw themselves into the resistance against the Empire of Orcs for the sake of the safety of their homeland. It was precisely because of this that South Border City could hold its ground for 2 years without being breached. There would come a day when manpower was depleted. 2 years later, more than half of the South Border City's men in their prime had been depleted. Faced with the Orcs' seemingly tireless siege and the deaths that they suffered, many people's willpower had gradually become dispirited. The day before yesterday, the city gate was almost breached. South Border City was shrouded in unprecedented panic. We're done for. No matter how powerful Lord Firenze is, there's nothing he can do without troops at his disposal. Sai, what should we do? His lordship has indeed treated us well. His Majesty the King is also wise. I really don't want to leave this place where I grew up. But I don't want to die either. Let's go to Bredel City. It's said that it's the safest city in the entire Lancelot Empire. After all, it's Lord Brian's city. Although Lord Brian has disappeared for 5 years, his lordship has a group of miraculous experts by his side. There shouldn't be any danger there. Sigh, I still don't want to leave my hometown unless it's absolutely necessary. Let's wait and see. If it really doesn't work out, we'll have no choice but to migrate thousands of miles in order to survive. Such conversations had been occurring frequently in recent days, and the frequency was getting higher and higher. Under the threat of death, everyone had to plan for themselves. Bredel City, which had been peaceful for the past few years and had developed rapidly in terms of military strength and financial resources, had unexpectedly become the first choice for everyone to migrate to. Just as the people of South Border City were in a state of panic on this day, the magical transportation matrix within the city, which had not lit up for a long time, suddenly blossomed with brilliant light. Miss has returned, the chief Imperial Guard cried out in surprise. He was beyond excited to see the radiant Fanny. Where is my father? Fanny did not waste any time. She knitted her brows and asked straightforwardly. His lordship is on top of the city walls, reinforcing the city walls with the civilians. Sigh, he hasn't come down for a day and a night. The chief Imperial Guard sighed softly, seemingly worried for Firenze. Come, let's go see father. Fanny pulled Han Shuo and flew out of the city. Who's that? The chief Imperial Guard stared blankly for a moment and suddenly asked in puzzlement. I don't know. Hasn't Miss Fanny always rejected the advances of any young and talented men? Why? Why did she suddenly change her character? A knight was equally astonished. Sigh. Lord Brian has disappeared for so many years. It seems that even Miss has forgotten about his lordship's contributions to the Empire. Sigh, forget it. We are just lowly soldiers. What's the point of worrying about this? However, Miss doesn't seem to be as loyal as we thought. Sigh, people's hearts are not what they used to be. People's hearts are not what they used to be. The sounds of discussion gradually died down. Chapter 594. The southern border city's city walls were like a woman who had been ravaged for a long time. The sturdy walls were dilapidated and full of scars. On a wall with obvious traces of gunpowder, the genius military commander of the Empire, Firenze, was directing the soldiers and civilians with a haggard face. He would even personally move some large rocks to repair the loose wall. Firenze, who was busy among the crowd, was no longer as high-spirited as he was in the past. His hair was disheveled and his armor was covered in a layer of dust, no longer as shiny as before. If it wasn't for Han Shuo's excellent memory, it would have been very difficult for ordinary people to recognize him from the crowd. They would have only thought of him as a poor man past his prime. The bitter battle brought more and more unbearable pressure to the people of the southern border. However, as the protector of the southern border, the pressure on Firenze was absolutely greater than everyone else's. Father, how did you become like this? A sorrowful cry came from Fanny's mouth. The fleeting Fanny arrived beside Firenze in the blink of an eye. Sparkling and translucent tears were already rolling down her cheeks, as if they would overflow at any moment. Lass, how did you come to the southern border? Firenze was extremely surprised to see his daughter. He smiled and shouted loudly. He opened his arms and intended to give Fanny a hug. As if he suddenly recalled something, Firenze abruptly stopped his actions. The surprise on his face abruptly faded as he solemnly said, "What are you doing here? Didn't I send you a letter telling you not to come? The situation in the southern border is so dangerous. I don't want you to come here and bear unnecessary danger. You can't hold on much longer yourself. Why do you still care about me?" Fanny angrily cried out. She could no longer control the rolling tears in her eyes. 2 long trails of tears immediately formed on her tender white cheeks. "I know you care about me, but your daughter is just as worried about you, father." A trace of relief and joy flashed across his eyes, but it was well concealed by Firenze. He pointed at Fanny and angrily shouted, "As the commander of the Southern Border Army, even if I die here in battle, it is still my responsibility. But you're different. You're one of the most outstanding Grand Magi in the Empire, as well as the director of the Necromancy Major of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. You have great responsibilities and so many students to teach. How can you bear unnecessary danger here?" "I'm not here in any other capacity. I'm your daughter. I'm worried about you, and I'm here to see you. That's all." Fanny had already arrived at Firenze's side. Ignoring Firenze's objections, she reached out her hand to tidy up Firenze's messy hair. Before Firenze lost his temper, she softly said, "Besides, I didn't come here alone. Who else?" Firenze stared blankly for a moment before following Fanny's gaze. Suddenly, his expression changed as though he had seen a ghost. He abruptly cursed, "Smelly brat, it's actually you. For 5 years, there was no news at all. Do you know how hard my daughter has been waiting for you? Little bastard, what did you promise me? Is this how you treat those women who love you?" Just like that, a torrent of curses gushed out from Firenze's mouth. When Firenze saw Han Shuo, his fiery temper could no longer be controlled. His curses showed no signs of stopping. Han Shuo smiled wryly. He admired his father-in-law's temper, but felt helpless at the same time. In addition, what Firenze said was the truth. Han Shuo simply could not find any reason to refute and could only let Firenze vent the anger in his heart. A string of curses came out of Firenze's mouth. The explosive power unleashed was indeed astonishing. After a while, when Han Shuo saw that Firenze still showed no signs of stopping, he used his divine energy to isolate the surrounding sound. With a smile on his face, Han Shuo nodded repeatedly, as though he was seriously listening to Firenze's lecture. His attitude was surprisingly good. "Smelly brat, don't think that I'll let you off just because your attitude is good." After a bout of cursing, Firenze no longer had any strength left. He glared fiercely at Han Shuo and finally expressed his unwillingness to let the matter rest. Although Han Shuo, who had been looking at Firenze with a smile on his face, did not hear Firenze's curses, he could sense that Firenze had successfully vented the heavy pressure in his heart by cursing to his heart's content. Although Firenze appeared to be exhausted from cursing, Han Shuo knew that Firenze's mental state had obviously relaxed a lot after such a bout of cursing. "Let's not talk about personal matters for now. The reason I came here this time is to lend you a hand and eliminate the threat of the Empire of Orcs." After Firenze finished venting his anger, Han Shuo first expressed his sincere apologies for Fanny's sake before he calmly said, "That's right. What? Clear up the threat of the Empire of Orcs? Have you disappeared for too long that you can't distinguish the situation?" Firenze, who had just calmed down, jumped up again like an ignited dynamite. He looked at Han Shuo as though he was looking at a lunatic and started shouting, "You heard me right." Han Shuo confidently said, "Since I'm here, it means that there are basically no more obstacles in your mission." "Smelly brat, you're really crazy. Do you think you're facing 1 or 2 orcs? Do you think you can repel an army of more than 100,000 orcs by yourself? Do you think you're a god?" Firenze was almost driven mad by Han Shuo. He felt that Han Shuo's words were a little too arrogant. "To an ordinary person, I'm indeed a god," Han Shuo proudly said. Firenze suddenly jumped up and pointed at Han Shuo with a flushed face. Just as he was about to say something, Han Shuo suddenly waved his hand and interrupted him. Han Shuo arrogantly said, "Say no more. You'll see the truth very soon." Han Shuo did not give Firenze the chance to jump up and curse. After finishing his words, Han Shuo swaggered out of the city. Under the baffled gazes of many soldiers and civilians of the south border city, Han Shuo flew step by step towards the dense mass of orc tents in front of him. "Who is that? How dare he speak to Lord Firenze like that?" a burly civilian asked in astonishment. "Lord Brian. He's Lord Brian. I was fortunate enough to meet him once in Austin City. There's no mistaking it." A military officer who had participated in the civil strife in Lancelot Empire a few years ago suddenly cried out in surprise. Everyone was shocked when they heard his words. All the soldiers and civilians on the city wall who heard the military officer's cry were like hot water that had been roasted in a fire for a long time, suddenly boiling. Clamorous shouts of surprise erupted from every corner of the city wall. Lord Brian has appeared. The undefeated Lord Brian, who had challenged the experts of the Empire, has appeared. The southern border is in luck. The war at the southern border is about to take a turn for the better. Lord Brian is the Lord of Bretel City. Since he has appeared, the Iron Blood Legion of Bretel City should be arriving soon. That's right, that's right. The Iron Blood Legion is the most powerful legion in the Empire apart from the Howling Legion. Moreover, the Iron Blood Legion hasn't suffered any casualties in the war. Their arrival this time will definitely bring hope to South Border City. We don't have to leave our hometown anymore. That's great, that's great. Heated discussions reverberated around the city wall. Every soldier and civilian who heard of Han Shua's arrival was brimming with excitement and joy. This hopelessly arrogant brat actually made so many soldiers and civilians feel at ease. Damn it, I wonder what those people will think if they see him being torn apart by the Empire of Orcs. That bastard who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Does he really think that he can turn the tide by himself and resolve the crisis that we haven't been able to resolve for 2 years? Firenze lowered his voice and growled while looking at his daughter. Perhaps. In this world, nothing is absolute. Fanny covered her mouth and laughed. Soon after, she shook Firenze's arm and said coquettishly, "Father, Brian has been delayed until now because of the Church of Light. Please don't blame him, okay?" Not good. Firenze put on a stern face and furiously glared at Fanny. He scolded in a low voice. "Has this little bastard been driven crazy? Why didn't you stop him from taking such an audacious action? You little lass, why are you so insensible?" Fanny snorted angrily after being reprimanded by Firenze. Knowing that he wouldn't believe her no matter what she said, she didn't bother to explain. She just looked at Han Shua with sparkling eyes and waited for Han Shua to make his move. Lord Brian is actually charging towards the Empire of Orcs. Oh my god, has Lord Brian gone mad? That's an orc army of more than 100,000. What's going on? Why is Lord Brian so irrational? Oh my god, what should we do? When the soldiers and civilians outside the city wall finally discovered the purpose of Han Shua's action, they started screaming one after another. The noise on the city wall became even louder and more chaotic. Just when everyone was either openly or secretly worried about Han Shua, a bright light flashed across the horizon. All of a sudden, an enormous bone dragon broke through the sky. On top of the bone dragon was a disdainful Lord of Death. Little Skull held a slender bone spur in his hand and silently issued a summoning call. As a low god who cultivated in the elemental energy of necromancy, Little Skull's control of necromancy energy had improved substantially. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, tens of thousands of undead creatures appeared in the sky amidst rays of light. Under Little Skull's majestic command, the undead creatures lined up neatly and methodically charged towards the Empire of Orcs. Rays of light shot across the sky. The elemental energy of death was extremely dense. Under Little Skull's summon, those undead creatures rushed madly from the netherworld without a care for their lives. In an instant, they had occupied several large areas. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.